I'm a nurse. I save lives for a living. But on Thanksgiving night, I came home to find my own 8-year-old son dying on my doorstep. His lips were blue. His tiny body shook so violently he couldn't speak. The temperature, 5 degrees below freezing. Through the frosted window, I saw them. My parents, my sister, her perfectly warm children laughing around the turkey dinner I paid $15,000 for. Not one of them looked toward the door. Not one of them cared that my son had been locked outside for 47 minutes. I carried him into that house, and the table went silent. My mother set down her wine glass, smiled that cold smile I'd known my whole life, and said, "He wanted to play outside, dear. Children need fresh air." That's when I said 6 words that changed everything. History repeats only if we allow. They had no idea what was coming. Because what I discovered next wasn't just child abuse, it was fraud, conspiracy, and a family secret so dark it would bring the FBI to their door. My father wasn't the quiet, harmless man everyone thought. My mother wasn't a victim. And my sister, she wasn't even my sister. By Christmas, my father would be in prison for murder. My family's fortune would be exposed as stolen blood money. And the grandmother I thought died of natural causes. She was poisoned. This is the story of how I destroyed my entire family to save my son. And I'd do it again. Stay until the end, because the coldest revenge is the one they never see coming. My name is Margaret Bennett. I'm 55 years old, and for the past 27 years I've worked as a charge nurse in the emergency department at Boston Memorial Hospital. I've seen people at their worst, broken bones, shattered lives, families torn apart by tragedy. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. Thanksgiving evening, I pulled into my driveway at 6:43. My shift had run late, a car accident on Route 93, critical patients. The kind of chaos that makes you forget it's a holiday. I was exhausted, my scrubs still smelling faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee from the break room. All I wanted was to see my son maybe have some leftover turkey and collapse into bed. But the moment I stepped out of my car, something felt wrong. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the front steps. And there, huddled against the door, was a small figure I recognized instantly. My 8-year-old son, Danny. He was wearing a thin gray t-shirt and blue cotton shorts, the pajamas he'd had on this morning when I'd dropped him off at my parents' house. Nothing else. No coat, no shoes, just a little boy curled into himself, shaking so hard I could see it from 15 feet away. The temperature was 28 degrees. I'd heard the weather report on my drive home record cold for November in Massachusetts, wind chill dropping it even lower. I ran. My nursing bag hit the ground somewhere behind me, contents spilling across the frozen driveway. "Danny." My voice cracked. He didn't respond. By the time I reached him, I was already shrugging out of my coat. His lips were blue. Not the pale blue you see in movies, a deep, dusky cyanosis that meant his body was shutting down, prioritizing his core organs over his extremities. His skin was mottled waxy. When I wrapped my coat around him and pulled him against my chest, his body was so cold, it felt like holding a block of ice wrapped in skin. "Mommy," he whispered. But his jaw was chattering so violently the word came out broken. I pressed my fingers against his neck, finding his pulse. Thready, fast. His heart was working overtime, trying desperately to warm blood that was too cold to warm. I've been a nurse long enough to know what mild hypothermia looks like. This was bordering on moderate. Another hour and we'd be talking about brain damage, cardiac arrest, death. Through the frosted window beside the front door, I could see them. All of them. My parents sat at the head of the dining table, my father carving the turkey with ceremonial precision, my mother raising a wine glass in some kind of toast. My sister Claire was there with her 3 children, all dressed in their Thanksgiving best, the girls in velvet dresses, the boy in a tiny suit vest. They were laughing. Someone said something funny, and my mother threw her head back, that practiced, elegant laugh she saved for company. The table was beautiful. Candles flickered in silver holders. The good china gleamed under the chandelier. I recognized the centerpiece, fresh flowers, probably $200 worth. I recognized the wine of Bordeaux my father had been saving for a special occasion. And I definitely recognized the turkey golden and massive, surrounded by all the trimmings. I'd paid for every bit of it. $15,000 wired from my checking account 2 weeks ago when my mother called and said, "Margaret, darling, we want to host Thanksgiving this year. Really do it right, but money's a bit tight. You know how it is. Could you help us out for the family?" I'd said yes. I always said yes. Now my son was freezing to death on the porch while they feasted on my money. I held Danny tighter, feeling his heartbeat against my ribs, too fast, too weak. And that's when the memories hit me, uninvited and visceral. I was 7 years old, standing in our backyard in February. Snow piled up past my knees. I'd gotten a B on a spelling test, and my mother said I needed to learn responsibility. She locked the back door. I stood out there for an hour, crying, pounding on the glass. When she finally let me in, I couldn't feel my feet. She handed me a towel and said, "Cold builds character, Margaret. Your grandmother taught me that. Someday you'll thank me." I never thanked her. I'd buried that memory so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. But standing here holding my frozen son, I understood something with perfect, terrible clarity. This wasn't discipline. It never had been. This was a pattern, a legacy of cruelty passed down like a family heirloom. My grandmother had done it to my mother. My mother had done it to me. And now they'd done it to Danny. The cycle ended here. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from rage so pure it felt like clarity. I stood up, Danny still wrapped in my coat, his face buried against my shoulder. I walked to the front door. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I used my hip to push down the handle, and I kicked the door open so hard it slammed against the interior wall. Every face at that table turned toward me. My mother's smile froze in place. My father's carving knife stopped mid-slice. Claire's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. I looked at each of them, these people I'd called family, these people I'd loved and feared and tried so hard to please. My voice when I spoke was quiet but steady. History repeats only if we allow. My mother's face shifted from surprise to annoyance, like I'd interrupted an important conversation with trivial drama. She opened her mouth to respond. But before she could speak, Danny's small voice cut through the silence, each word broken by violent shivers. "Grandpa said, 'You deserved it too, Mommy.'" I carried Danny straight through the dining room, past the table laden with food I'd paid for, past the family who'd left him to freeze. His body was still trembling against mine, small fingers clutching my scrubs like I might disappear if he let go. "Margaret, really," my mother said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. Her voice had that quality I knew too well, silk wrapped around steel, smooth on the surface but sharp enough to cut. "He wanted to play outside. Children need fresh air. You're making a scene." I stopped walking, turned slowly. The entire table was staring at me, but not with concern, not with guilt or shock or horror. They looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd just committed a social faux pas tracking mud across a white carpet. "Fresh air," I repeated. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too calm, too quiet. "In 28-degree weather. For how long?" My mother's expression didn't change. She'd perfected that look over decades, neutral, unreadable, with just a hint of disappointment. "Oh, Margaret, you've always been so dramatic." I pulled out my phone with one hand, keeping Danny wrapped tight against me with the other. My fingers shook as I opened the Ring doorbell app. I'd installed the camera 3 months ago, mostly to see when packages were delivered. Now I pulled up today's footage and turned the screen toward the table. The timestamp read 5:47. Danny's small figure appeared on the porch, knocking on the door. His breath made clouds in the cold air. At 5:53, he started pounding harder. At 6:02, he was crying, his voice thin and desperate. "Grandma, please, I'm cold. Please let me in." At 6:19, he slid down to sit against the door, still shivering. At 6:34, he'd gone still in that terrible way that meant his body was giving up the fight. 47 minutes. My son had been locked outside for 47 minutes. I hit the record button on my phone's audio app and slipped it back into my pocket screen side in. If I'd learned anything in 27 years of nursing, it was this document, everything. "He was banging on the door," I said. "Crying. You heard him." Claire, my younger sister, rolled her eyes in that particular way she'd perfected as a teenager and never outgrown. She was 33 now, still living off our parents' generosity, still treating me like I was the problem. "God, Meg, you always exaggerate everything. Look at him, he's fine. Kids are resilient." "His core temperature is probably 92 degrees, I said flatly. "Another hour and we'd be talking about brain damage." "See?" Claire gestured at me with her wine glass Bordeaux sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Dramatic. You're a nurse, not a doctor. You're not even his mother half the time you're always at work." The words hit exactly where she'd aimed them. The eternal working mother's guilt weaponized and deployed with surgical precision. My father cleared his throat. Thomas Bennett, 70 years old, retired pharmacist. Church deacon, respected community member. He'd spent 40 years behind a pharmacy counter dispensing medications and advice in equal measure, wearing starched white coats and an expression of benevolent authority. He leaned back in his chair now, fingers steepled, voice hard as granite. "Margaret, my mother taught me this method. Her mother taught her. It's tradition." He gestured at the feast spread before him, the turkey he hadn't paid for, the wine he hadn't bought, the china that had been my grandmother's. "Kids these days are soft, coddled. A little cold teaches survival, builds character, makes them strong." His eyes met mine, and I saw no doubt there, no shame. Only certainty. "Look at all this. We're family. You think we'd hurt him?" I looked around the table. My sister's 3 children, Emma, Sophie, and Jake, sat perfectly still, eyes down, shoulders hunched. They were 8, 6, and 10. The house was warm, the thermostat probably set to 72, but all 3 of them wore long-sleeved shirts. Emma's sleeves came down past her wrists. Sophie kept tugging hers lower. Something cold that had nothing to do with the weather settled in my stomach. "Take off your sweater, Emma," I said quietly. Emma's head snapped up, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "I'm cold." "The house is 70 degrees. "Margaret, stop," Claire said sharply. "You're scaring her." But I was already moving around the table. I gently touched Emma's shoulder, and she flinched, an instinctive, involuntary movement that told me everything I needed to know. I carefully rolled up her sleeve. Her forearm was covered in small, round marks. Faint healing, but unmistakable. Frostbite scars. The kind you get from prolonged exposure to cold. "How long?" I asked her softly. "How long were you outside last time?" Emma's lower lip trembled. She looked at my mother, then my father, then back at me. "I don't remember." "She's lying," my mother said, calmly taking a sip of wine. "Those are from playing in the snow. Children don't know to dry off properly." I looked at Sophie, then Jake. Both of them had their sleeves pulled down tight. I didn't need to see their arms to know what I'd find there. This wasn't about Danny. This was systematic. This was intentional. This was a pattern that had been happening for months, maybe years, and I'd been too blind or too compliant to see it. "I paid $15,000 for this dinner," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I paid for the turkey, the wine, the flowers, the rental china. I paid for everything." My mother laughed. It was a brittle sound like glass breaking in slow motion. "Family means sharing dear. You don't keep score in a family. That's so transactional." She said the word like it was something dirty. "We raised you. We gave you everything. And now you begrudge us a simple holiday meal." But I was seeing clearly now for the first time in decades. The designer purse hanging on Claire's chair, a Hermes Birkin, probably $3,500. My mother's earrings catching the candlelight diamond studs, at least 2 carats each, 8,000 if they were real. And they were real. My father's watch, a Rolex he'd bought 6 months ago. Claire's children's clothes designer labels I recognized from the expensive boutiques downtown. All of it funded by me. The loans that never got repaid. The emergencies that required immediate wire transfers. The family investments that somehow never returned dividends. I'd been their ATM for years, dispensing cash on demand, never questioning, never pushing back. And my son had nearly died because I'd been too afraid to say no. Danny stirred against my shoulder, his breathing shallow and rapid. I needed to get him warm, check his vitals properly, maybe take him to the ER if his core temp didn't stabilize. But first I needed them to understand. "This ends tonight," I said. My mother's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Margaret, you always were the sensitive one. Why don't you take Danny home, give him some hot chocolate, and we'll talk about this when you're feeling more rational." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. Someone calling. I ignored it, but then it buzzed again immediately, the insistent pattern of someone who wouldn't give up. I pulled it out, Danny still wrapped in my arms. The screen showed a blocked number, but the caller ID had populated automatically. Child Protective Services. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Child Protective Services. Calling me. On Thanksgiving night. My father's face remained impassive, but I caught the flicker, just a fraction of a second, of something that might have been satisfaction. My mother continued cutting her turkey with surgical precision, each movement deliberate and controlled. They knew. Somehow, they already knew CPS would be calling. I let it go to voicemail and slipped the phone back into my pocket, the recording still running. Danny's breathing was evening out slightly, his shivering less violent now that my body heat was transferring to him, but he needed proper warming. Blankets. Warm fluids. Medical assessment. Yet I couldn't leave. Not yet. Because I suddenly understood that walking out this door meant stepping into a trap that had already been set. "You called them," I said. It wasn't a question. My mother looked up, and her expression was one of gentle concern, the kind a loving grandmother might wear when worried about her daughter's mental state. "Called who, dear? Don't." The word came out harder than I intended. "Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know exactly what I'm talking about." Claire set down her wineglass with an exaggerated sigh. "Here we go. Everything's always a conspiracy with you, Meg. You see villains everywhere. It's exhausting." "Is it?" I looked at her directly, this sister I'd protected and enabled for 3 decades. "Tell me, Claire, when was the last time you paid for anything yourself? Your mortgage, your car payment, Emma's private school tuition?" Her face flushed. "That's none of your business." It became my business when my money started paying for it. I shifted Danny's weight, feeling his small body pressed against mine. "The $15,000 I sent for this dinner, where did it actually go?" "Margaret." My father's voice held a warning note, the same tone he'd used when I was a child, and had asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask. "We're family. We don't interrogate each other about finances like we're strangers. It's unseemly." "Unseemly," I repeated. The word tasted bitter. "You know what's unseemly, leaving a child outside to freeze while you eat a meal his mother paid for? That's unseemly." My mother dabbed at her mouth with a linen napkin, each movement theatrical in its precision. "You're upset. We understand. But darling, you're seeing malice where there's only love. Danny was being disciplined. He refused to share his toys with his cousins. He needed to learn that selfishness has consequences." I looked at Emma, Sophie, and Jake again. They hadn't moved. They sat frozen in their chairs, forks in hand, eyes fixed on their plates like prisoners waiting for sentencing. The long sleeves in a warm house, the frostbite scars hidden beneath fabric, the fear in Emma's eyes when I'd asked her a direct question. "How many times," I asked my mother, "how many times have you done this to them?" "Margaret, you're being hysterical." My mother's voice remained level, reasonable, the voice of sanity confronting delusion. "We're raising them properly, with discipline, with structure. The way we raised you, and look how well you turned out. You're a successful nurse. You own your own home. You're independent and strong." "I'm damaged," I said quietly. "I spent 30 years thinking I was broken because I couldn't handle normal discipline. I went to therapy. I took medication for anxiety. I thought there was something wrong with me." Danny's heartbeat was steadier now against my chest, but I could feel him listening, absorbing every word. "But there wasn't. There isn't. What you did to me wasn't discipline. It was abuse." My father stood up his chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. He was a tall man, still imposing at 70, and he used his height the way he'd always used it, to intimidate, to dominate, to remind everyone who held the power. "That's enough. You will not come into our home and make accusations. We have done nothing but love you and support you. We took Danny for the day so you could work. We fed him. We cared for him. You locked him outside in freezing weather. We taught him a lesson about behavior and consequences." My father's voice was granite, now hard and unyielding. "My mother taught me this. Her mother before her. It's how the Bennett family raises strong children. You were too soft with him from the start, Margaret. All this coddling, this gentle parenting nonsense. Look at the result, a boy who doesn't respect his elders, who won't share, who throws tantrums." "He's 8 years old," I said. "He's a child." "Exactly. And children need to be shaped before they become adults. A little cold teaches survival, resilience, the ability to endure hardship." He gestured expansively at the dining room, at the chandelier, and the fine china, and the abundance spread across the table. "Look at all this. Look at what we've built. Do you think we did that by being soft? By giving up when things got difficult? We're family. Margaret, we're preparing him for the real world. You think we'd actually hurt him?" But I was looking at the real world, at my sister's designer purse hanging on the chair, a Hermes bag I'd seen online for $3,000. At my mother's ears, where new diamond studs caught the light easily, $8,000 worth of stones. At my father's wrist, where a Rolex gleamed the watch he'd bought himself 6 months ago after I'd sent money for urgent house repairs. The borrowed money that never got repaid. The family emergencies that required immediate transfers. The investments that never materialized. The constant requests always couched in language of family obligation and togetherness. "You don't keep score in a family," my mother had said earlier. But they'd been keeping score all along. Every dollar I sent, every boundary I failed to set, every time I said yes when I should have said no, they'd been tallying it up, measuring my compliance, training me to be their personal bank account. And my son was paying the price for my weakness. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another call. Probably CPS calling back. I felt the weight of Danny in my arms, felt the trembling that still hadn't completely stopped, felt the smallness of him against me. Child Protective Services was calling me on Thanksgiving night. Someone had reported me. And I knew with the cold certainty that comes from finally seeing a pattern you've been standing inside of exactly who had made that call. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on Danny's bed watching him breathe, monitoring his temperature every 30 minutes like he was a patient in my ER. By 3 a.m., his core temp had stabilized at 98.4. His color was better. The shivering had stopped. But I couldn't stop seeing his blue lips, couldn't stop hearing my father's voice justifying it, couldn't stop feeling the cold calculation behind my mother's smile. At 7:15 on Friday morning, my doorbell rang. I'd been expecting this. I just hadn't expected it quite so soon. 2 people stood on my porch, both wearing the weary expressions of social workers who'd seen too much and slept too little. The woman was in her mid-40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and circles under her eyes that spoke of long nights and impossible caseloads. The man was younger, maybe 30, with a clipboard, and the careful neutrality of someone trained not to show judgment. "Margaret Bennett?" the woman asked. "Yes." "I'm Sandra Mitchell from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague James Park. May we come in?" I stepped aside and let them enter. Danny was still asleep upstairs. I'd already called the hospital and taken a personal day. Whatever was about to happen, I needed to be present for it. Sandra sat on my couch and opened a folder. Ms. Bennett, we received a report yesterday evening about your son being left outside in cold weather. The report came from your neighbor Ruth Morgan. She paused, watching my face. Mrs. Morgan stated she observed your son on your parents' porch for an extended period in inadequate clothing. That's correct, I said. I have footage if you'd like to see it. Sandra's eyebrows rose slightly. We'll get to that. But Ms. Bennett, we also received a second report. From your father, Thomas Bennett. He called our hotline at approximately 8:30 last night. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I'd known they would counterattack, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. Mr. Bennett reported that you have a history of child neglect. Sandra continued, her voice carefully neutral. He stated that you frequently leave your son with family members for extended periods due to your work schedule. He also expressed concern about your mental health, stating you've been erratic, paranoid, and have made unfounded accusations against family members. He suggested you may be experiencing some kind of breakdown. James was taking notes. I could hear the scratch of his pen against paper, each stroke feeling like evidence being recorded against me. My father, I said slowly, locked my son outside in 28-degree weather for 47 minutes, and within 3 hours, he'd weaponized the child protection system against me to cover his own actions. Sandra's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is. I stood up and walked to my kitchen counter where I'd spent the hours between 3 and 7 a.m. preparing. I'd worked enough cases involving CPS to know how this would go. Emotion would work against me. Disorganization would work against me. The only thing that might work in my favor was evidence presented calmly and systematically. I handed Sandra a folder. Ring doorbell footage from my parents' home, time-stamped. You'll see Danny being locked out at 5:47 p.m. and me arriving at 6:34, 47 minutes. I gave her a second folder. Text messages from my mother from yesterday morning asking me to drop Danny off early because she wanted extra time with her grandson. I wasn't scheduled to work until noon, but she specifically requested he arrive by 9 a.m. Sandra was paging through the documents, her expression shifting from neutral to focused. Here's Danny's complete medical records from his pediatrician. I continued handing over a third folder. No history of neglect, concerns no missed appointments, all vaccinations current. And here's my employment record from Boston Memorial Hospital, 27 years charge nurse, no disciplinary actions. My supervisor provided a reference letter. It's in there. James had stopped writing. He was watching me with something that might have been respect. I also have a statement from Ruth Morgan, I said. She's my neighbor at my parents' address. She lives next door to them. I called her last night after I got home. She confirmed she made the report to CPS after watching Danny on the porch for over half an hour. She tried knocking on my parents' door herself, but they didn't answer. Sandra closed the folders and looked at me directly. Ms. Bennett, you seem very prepared for this conversation. I'm a nurse, I said simply. I document everything. It's how I stay alive in a profession where one mistake can cost someone their life. She nodded slowly. Most parents we visit aren't this organized. Most are emotional, defensive, unprepared. Most parents haven't spent 27 years navigating hospital bureaucracy and legal liability. I sat back down across from her. Sandra, I know what this looks like from your perspective. Competing reports, family conflict, he said, she said. But the evidence doesn't lie. My son was locked outside in freezing weather by his grandparents. That's child endangerment. My father calling you 3 hours later to accuse me of neglect isn't concern, it's strategy. Sandra exchanged a glance with James. Something unspoken passed between them. Ms. Bennett, Sandra said carefully, your parents have been respected members of this community for over 30 years. Your father is a church deacon. They have no history with our agency. This is their first time being reported. There it was, the institutional bias I'd been expecting, status as armor, reputation as shield. "And my son has frostbite," I said quietly. "Not from playing in the snow, from being deliberately locked outside as punishment. Does his pain matter less because my father volunteers at church?" Sandra's jaw tightened. "That's not what I'm saying. But it's what you're thinking. It's what this investigation will reflect. My parents' standing in the community will be weighed against the evidence. And institutions protect people with status, not 8-year-old children." James spoke for the first time. "Ms. Bennett, we take all reports seriously." "I'm sure you do. And I'm sure this will require an extensive investigation, interviews with all family members, weeks of back and forth. Meanwhile, my son has been traumatized, and my parents have learned that the system can be weaponized to silence victims." Sandra stood up, gathering the folders. "We'll review this evidence. We'll interview your son when he wakes up if that's acceptable to you. And yes, we'll need to speak with your parents and other family members. This investigation will be thorough." "How thorough?" I asked. "Thorough enough to check my nieces and nephews for frostbite scars. Thorough enough to question why 3 children were wearing long sleeves in a 70-degree house on Thanksgiving." Sandra paused at the door. "We'll be in touch, Ms. Bennett." After they left, I stood at the window watching their car pull away. I'd done everything right. Presented evidence, stayed calm, documented thoroughly. And it wouldn't matter. Not enough. Not yet. Because Thomas and Patricia Bennett had 30 years of community goodwill, and I had 47 minutes of doorbell footage. The system was designed to move slowly, to investigate carefully, to protect the accused as much as the victim. And my parents knew exactly how to exploit that. I was still standing at the window when I noticed it. A manila envelope on my doorstep, partially hidden behind the potted plant near my door. I opened the front door and picked it up. No postage. Hand-delivered. The envelope was unmarked except for one line written in black ink, "Family Trust Estate Documents Confidential." My grandmother's trust. The one I'd never seen. The one my parents had managed for 10 years since her death. Someone wanted me to see what was inside. I carried the envelope inside and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I broke the seal. Inside were photocopies of legal documents, bank statements, and what appeared to be a last will and testament. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used for official estate planning. At the top of the first page in elegant script, I saw my grandmother's name, Eleanor Grace Bennett. The trust had been established in November 1995. I was 25 then, fresh out of nursing school, working night shifts, and living in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. I remembered my grandmother calling me that month, her voice warm and conspiratorial. "Margaret, darling, I've set something up for you. For your future. Your father will explain when the time is right." He never had. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, my nurse's brain automatically organizing them by date and category. The original trust document listed the initial value $1,200,000. My grandmother had been widowed young, invested wisely, and lived modestly. According to the terms laid out in careful legalese, I was designated as the primary beneficiary. My parents were named as trustees responsible for managing the funds until I turned 55. I'm 55. I turned 55 4 months ago in June. My heart started pounding as I flipped through the pages. According to the trust agreement on my 55th birthday, full control should have transferred to me automatically. The trustees were required to provide a full accounting and release all assets within 30 days. I'd never received a phone call, never gotten a letter, never seen a single document until this moment, standing in my kitchen holding papers that someone had anonymously left on my doorstep. The bank statements were paper-clipped together, covering the past 5 years. I ran my finger down the withdrawal column and my stomach turned over. $8,000 for community Thanksgiving event in November 2023. $12,000 for Winter Hearts Fund in January 2024. $6,500 for Family Emergency Relief in March. Another $10,000 for Church Building Campaign in May. The withdrawals went on, page after page, each one authorized with a trustee's signature. Every signature was my father's. I grabbed my phone and called the bank listed on the statements. After navigating through automated menus and waiting on hold for 12 minutes, I finally reached a human being. First National Trust Services, this is Kelly speaking. My name is Margaret Bennett. I'm the beneficiary of the Eleanor Bennett Family Trust. I need information about recent transactions. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Can you verify your social security number and date of birth? I provided both. More typing. Ms. Bennett, I see the account. However, according to our records, you're not authorized to make inquiries. The account is managed by the trustees Thomas and Patricia Bennett. I turned 55 4 months ago, I said, keeping my voice level. According to the trust documents I'm looking at, control should have transferred to me. More typing, a longer pause. Ms. Bennett, I'm not seeing any transfer of authority in our system. The trustees are still listed as the primary account managers. If you believe there's been an error, you'll need to contact the trust administrator or have your attorney submit the appropriate paperwork. Who's the trust administrator? Let me see. The notary and financial advisor of record is Elaine Morrison. She's been the administrator since the trust was established. My mouth went dry. Pastor Elaine Morrison. I don't have a title listed, just the name. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I thanked her and hung up. Pastor Morrison, the woman who'd baptized Danny when he was 6 months old, who'd counseled me through my divorce, who led the women's Bible study my mother attended every Wednesday. She was in her early 60s, beloved by everyone, always the first to volunteer for charity work, and the last to leave any community event. Her signature appeared throughout the trust documents, authenticating amendments, witnessing trustee decisions, notarizing transfers. I looked more carefully at the amendments. 3 of them were dated after my grandmother's death in 2015. One extended the trustee authority indefinitely in cases of beneficiary incapacity or financial irresponsibility. Another added language about trustee discretion in distribution timing. A third created something called the Family Holiday Fund as a subsidiary account controlled entirely by the trustees for family welfare and community charitable purposes. Every amendment bore Pastor Morrison's notary seal and signature. I've been a nurse long enough to know that symptoms rarely appear in isolation. When you see one abnormality, you look for the pattern. A single elevated white blood cell count might be nothing. But combine it with fever fatigue and unexplained bruising, and you're looking at leukemia. This wasn't just my parents being controlling. This wasn't just family dysfunction or poor communication. This was systematic, documented, notarized fraud with a respected community figure providing the legal cover. The $15,000 I'd wired for Thanksgiving suddenly made sickening sense. They'd already paid for that dinner using my inheritance money. They'd made me pay for it again out of my own paycheck while the trust account I should have controlled sat there funding their lifestyle. How many times had they done this? How many emergencies had I funded while they siphoned money from an account that was legally mine? I was still staring at the documents when my phone buzzed with a notification. Not a call this time, but a banking alert from my personal checking account. Transfer completed $20,000 from Margaret Bennett to Family Holiday Fund. Authorized by co-account holder Thomas Bennett. The room spun. I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. My father's name was listed as a co-account holder on my checking account. I'd added him years ago when I was traveling for a nursing conference and needed someone who could access my account to pay bills if something came up. I'd forgotten he was even on there. $20,000. Gone. Transferred to an account I'd never heard of bearing the same name as the suspicious fund in my grandmother's trust documents. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were stealing from my current income. And they were doing it right now in real time, even as CPS investigated me and my son recovered from hypothermia upstairs. I looked at the anonymous envelope on my table. Someone had wanted me to see these documents. Someone who knew about the trust, about the fraud, about the systematic theft that had been happening for years. Someone who wanted me to fight back. I sat staring at that banking alert for a full minute before my brain kicked back into gear. $20,000 stolen in real time. My father had just proven he would do anything to maintain control, including draining my accounts, while CPS investigated me for the abuse he'd committed. I needed help. Not the kind you get from friends who mean well but don't understand. I needed someone who'd seen this before, someone who knew how to fight back. I scrolled through my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in almost 15 years. Martha Chen. We'd been roommates in nursing school, studying late into the night, surviving on coffee and mutual exhaustion. Then one semester, Martha had stopped showing up to class. When I finally tracked her down, she told me her mother had been swindled out of her life savings by Martha's uncle and his lawyer. Martha dropped out of nursing school that week and enrolled in law school instead. I dialed her number, half expecting it to be disconnected after all these years. She answered on the second ring. Martha Chen. Martha, it's Margaret Bennett, from nursing school. I don't know if you remember me, but I need... Stop. Her voice was sharp, authoritative. Don't say another word on this phone. Where are you right now? Home. My son is upstairs sleeping. Martha, my parents. Not on the phone, Margaret. Can you come to my office, downtown Miller Building, 7th floor? Bring every document you have, every piece of paper, every bank statement, every text message. Can you be here in an hour? Yes, but 1 hour. Don't call anyone else. Don't text your parents. Don't post anything on social media. Just come. She hung up before I could respond. I checked on Danny, still sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady, and his color good. I called my neighbor Julie and asked if she could sit in my living room for a few hours while Danny napped. She arrived within 10 minutes, concern written across her face after I gave her the abbreviated version of Thanksgiving night. Martha's office was in a building I'd driven past 1,000 times but never entered. The 7th floor directory listed her as Martha Chen SQ, Elder Law and Estate Litigation. The waiting room was small but professional, with leather chairs and a coffee table stacked with legal journals. The walls were lined with framed newspaper articles. I caught headlines as I walked past. Local attorney recovers $890K in estate fraud case. Chen wins landmark victory in financial exploitation trial. Martha emerged from her office before I could sit down. She was 60 now, her hair more gray than black, but she had the same intense focus I remembered from our study sessions. She wore a navy suit and glasses that made her look formidable. She hugged me quickly, then pulled back and looked me in the eyes. Are you safe right now? Is your son safe? Yes, he's home with a neighbor. Good. Come in. Her office was larger than the waiting room, dominated by a massive desk covered in file folders. Behind her, floor-to-ceiling shelves held legal books and case files. I saw names on the spines: Estate of Dorothy Miller, Estate of James Wong, Guardianship of Alice Thompson. Every one of them marked recovered or settled in red pen. Sit, Martha said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Tell me everything. Start with Thursday night. I talked for 3 minutes straight, the words spilling out in a rush. The frozen sun, the gaslighting family, the CPS call, the trust documents, the $20,000 theft this morning. Martha listened without interrupting, taking notes in rapid shorthand. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Margaret, I'm going to say something that might be hard to hear. Your parents aren't just controlling or difficult. They're criminals who happen to share your DNA. The words should have felt shocking. Instead, they felt like relief. I know, I said quietly. Good. Because the first rule of fighting family fraud is this: document everything. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. The second rule: assume nothing. Don't assume they'll stop. Don't assume they have limits. Don't assume anyone else will protect you. And the third rule: trust the pattern. 1 incident might be a mistake. 2 might be coincidence. 3 or more is a system. For the next 4 hours, we built what Martha called the foundation. She photographed every document I'd brought with her, phone uploaded them to a secure cloud server, then helped me create a spreadsheet with every suspicious transaction from the trust statements. We built a timeline starting from my grandmother's death in 2015, tracking every withdrawal, every amendment, every time my parents had asked me for money. The pattern was undeniable. Major trust withdrawals corresponded exactly with periods when my parents had claimed financial hardship and asked me for help. The $15,000 Thanksgiving dinner I'd funded, the trust had distributed $12,000 for community Thanksgiving event the same week. "They made you pay twice," Martha said flatly. "Used your inheritance to fund it, then guilted you into paying again out of your salary." She pulled up the IRS nonprofit database on her computer and searched for Family Holiday Fund. Nothing. This fund doesn't exist as a registered charity. Every dollar they collected under that name is potentially tax fraud. I watched her work, this woman who'd transformed her own family trauma into expertise, and felt something shift inside me. I'd spent my whole life being the good daughter, the responsible one, the person who said yes because saying no meant conflict. But good daughters don't let their sons freeze. Responsible people don't enable theft. As the sun set outside Martha's window, casting long shadows across her desk, I looked at the mountain of evidence we'd assembled and felt the weight of what came next. "Martha," I said slowly, "they're still my parents. If we do this, if we pursue this, my father could go to prison. How do I live with that?" She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she looked at me, her expression was gentle but unflinching. "You're not sending him anywhere, Margaret. You're revealing the truth. He built his own prison with his choices. Every fraudulent signature, every stolen dollar, every time he locked a child outside in the cold, those were his decisions." She leaned forward. "And Margaret, he called CPS on you. He was willing to destroy you to potentially have your son taken away to protect himself. That's not parental love. That's parasitic survival." I thought of Danny's blue lips, the way his small body had trembled against mine. The 47 minutes he'd spent crying and banging on a door that wouldn't open. "What do we do next?" I asked. Martha's phone rang before she could answer. She glanced at the screen, then at me, her expression shifting to concern. "It's Boston Memorial Hospital. Your employer," she answered on speaker. "This is Martha Chen." "Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Patel from the emergency department. We have your client's son, Daniel Bennett, here. He was just admitted with complications from cold exposure." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, complications?" "He was fine when I left. His neighbor was watching him." Dr. Patel's voice was calm but urgent. "Your neighbor called 911 about 40 minutes ago. Daniel was having difficulty breathing and developed a fever of 103. We've admitted him to pediatrics. You should come now." Martha was already grabbing her keys. We made it to the hospital in 12 minutes, a drive that should have taken 25. I ran through the ER entrance, my badge still clipped to my purse from years of habit, and the triage nurse waved me through without question. Third floor pediatrics room, 312. Danny was in bed, an oxygen cannula in his nose, an IV line running into his left arm. His cheeks were flushed with fever, his breathing rapid and shallow. Dr. Patel stood beside the bed reviewing a chart, and he looked up when I entered. "Margaret," he said. He'd been the attending physician on Thanksgiving night, the one who'd examined Danny in my driveway and cleared him to stay home with monitoring. "I'm sorry. This is aspiration pneumonia." The words hit me like a physical blow. I knew exactly what that meant. He aspirated while shivering. "Most likely. When the body is hypothermic, it prioritizes core temperature. Muscle control becomes impaired, including the muscles that protect the airway. He probably inhaled saliva or mucus during the severe shivering phase, and bacteria colonized his lungs. His immune system was already compromised from the cold exposure, so it couldn't fight off the infection." I moved to Danny's bedside and took his hand. It was hot, dry, nothing like the icy flesh I'd held 2 days ago. "Treatment protocol. IV antibiotics, oxygen support fluids. He's stable, but Margaret, we need to talk." Dr. Patel gestured toward the hallway. I squeezed Danny's hand and followed him out, Martha close behind. In the hallway, Dr. Patel pulled up Danny's chart on a tablet. "I accessed his complete medical history for the admission. There's something you need to see." He turned the screen toward me. An ER visit from October of last year, 13 months ago. Chief complaint suspected cold exposure, minor frostbite on 3 fingers of the right hand. Treatment, rewarming protocol. Discharge home. Reporting party grandparents, Thomas and Patricia Bennett. Notes stated the child had accidentally locked himself outside while playing. I'd never seen this record. Never knew this visit had happened. Why wasn't I notified? My voice came out strangled. I'm his mother. I'm listed as primary contact. Dr. Patel scrolled down. According to the notes they called you. The attending physician documented that the mother was contacted, stated the grandparents had permission to seek treatment, and that she would discuss discipline methods with them regarding the child's behavior. Your phone number is listed as the contact who approved discharge. I never got that call. I never approved anything. I didn't even know he was here. Dr. Patel's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. Margaret, I have to ask. Given this prior visit and the current admission both related to cold exposure while in your parents' care, I know how it looks, I interrupted. I know exactly how it looks, but I'm telling you this is the first I'm hearing about any previous ER visit. Martha stepped forward, producing a business card. Dr. Patel, I'm Margaret's attorney. I'd like copies of all medical records related to both visits, including the contact logs showing who was called and when. Dr. Patel took the card, his expression unreadable. I'll have medical records pull everything. After he left, I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. Martha put a hand on my shoulder. They created a paper trail. They've been building a defense for over a year. They hurt my son a year ago, documented it as an accident, and forged my approval. I looked through the window at Danny, small and vulnerable in that hospital bed. This wasn't just Thanksgiving. This is a pattern. I went back into the room and sat in the chair beside Danny's bed. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. Mom. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Am I in trouble? The question broke something inside me. No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. You've never been in trouble. Martha appeared in the doorway. Margaret, the lab is here for blood work. A phlebotomist entered with her cart, and an idea crystallized in my mind with sudden, sharp clarity. I've been a nurse for 25 years. I know what blood can tell you, what secrets hide in genetic markers and antibody panels. Dr. Patel? I called into the hallway. He returned, and I kept my voice professional, clinical. Since we're drawing blood anyway, can we add a comprehensive panel blood typing antibody screen for future transfusion compatibility screening? He raised an eyebrow slightly. That's not typically necessary for pneumonia, but I can order it if you want it for his records. I do. Thank you. After the blood was drawn and the phlebotomist left, Martha looked at me questioningly. I waited until we were alone before I explained. Claire volunteered to donate blood if Danny needed it. On Thanksgiving, when I was checking him, she made a big show of offering. Whatever he needs, I'm here for family. I watched the monitors tracking Danny's vital signs. I've seen enough family dynamics in 25 years to know when something doesn't add up. The way my parents treat Claire differently. The way my mother looks at her sometimes like she's seeing someone else. You think there's a genetic secret, Martha said. I think there's a reason my parents have been playing us against each other our whole lives, and blood doesn't lie. I looked down at my son, his chest rising and falling with 2 rapid breaths. The results will be ready in 5 days. If I'm right, it changes everything. Martha nodded slowly. And if you're wrong, then we focus on the financial fraud and the child abuse. But Martha, I'm not wrong. I can feel it. I spent the next 3 hours at Danny's bedside watching his oxygen saturation levels slowly climb from 92 to 96% as the antibiotics began working. The fever broke around midnight. He fell into a deeper, more natural sleep, and I finally let myself breathe. My medical training kept running the numbers in my head. Mild hypothermia starts at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, moderate at 90 degrees, severe at 82. Death follows shortly after. Danny's core temperature when I found him had been 91 degrees. I'd been minutes away from losing him forever. Not hours, minutes. I leaned close to his sleeping face and whispered, "This cycle of cold ends with me, I promise you." When I finally stood to stretch my legs, I walked into the hallway to find a coffee machine. That's when I saw him. My father stood by the elevator, shoulders hunched, face in his hands. As I watched, he looked up, and I saw tears streaming down his face. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching tears stream down my father's face. He saw me, and quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but the damage was done. Thomas Bennett, the man who never showed weakness, who prided himself on control and discipline, was crying in a public hospital corridor. He walked toward me, and I fought every instinct to step back. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance like he knew he wasn't welcome closer. "How is he?" His voice was hoarse. "Stable. Aspiration pneumonia from the hypothermia you caused." He flinched. "Margaret, I need to talk to you, please. Not here." "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen. Please. Give me 5 minutes." Something in his voice made me hesitate. It wasn't the commanding tone I'd grown up with. It was desperation, maybe even fear. Against my better judgment, I followed him to the elevator and down to the parking garage. It was nearly 11 at night, and the garage was mostly empty, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls. He turned to face me under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I saw what I'd missed in the hallway. He looked 10 years older than he had 3 days ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His shoulders sagged. His hands trembled slightly. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice cracking. "Your mother controls everything. The bank accounts, the church reputation, the family story, every single thing." He laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Everyone thinks I'm the patriarch, the head of the household. But Margaret, I haven't made a real decision in 40 years. You made the decision to lock my son outside in freezing weather." "No, she made that decision. I just didn't stop it." He ran his hands through his gray hair. "Do you know what it's like to be told every day that you're weak, incompetent? That without her management you'd lose everything? She's been telling me that since we got married. When I disagree with her, she threatens to leave to tell everyone what a failure I am, to destroy my reputation in the church. My entire identity is wrapped up in being Thomas Bennett, respected community member, church deacon. Without that, I'm nothing." I wanted to feel sympathy. Part of me, the daughter who'd once looked up to this man, wanted to believe him, but I kept hearing Danny's labored breathing 3 floors above us. "She controlled the abuse," I said flatly. "But you participated. You told Danny I deserved it too." His face crumpled. "I was trying to survive. When you go along with her, life is bearable. When you resist, she makes you pay. I've been paying for 40 years. My son almost died." "I know." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small external hard drive. "This is everything. The real accounting ledgers for the trust. The original will before the amendments. Emails between your mother and Pastor Morrison. I've been documenting for 3 years. I stared at the drive in his hand. 3 years. You've been collecting evidence for 3 years. Ever since I realized what really happened to your grandmother." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, what really happened?" He looked away, jaw clenched. "I can't tell you. Not yet. But it's all on here. Financial records, communications, everything you'll need to protect yourself." He pressed the drive into my hand. "Promise me you'll use this to protect yourself and your son. I can't protect you anymore. I don't think I ever could." "Dad, what happened to Grandma?" But he was already walking away, shoulders hunched, moving like a man headed to his own execution. He disappeared into the stairwell, and I was left standing alone in the parking garage holding a hard drive that suddenly felt very heavy. I went back upstairs to check on Danny one more time before leaving. He was sleeping peacefully, his oxygen levels holding steady at 97%. I kissed his forehead and drove to Martha's office. She'd given me a key and told me to come back any time, day or night. It was nearly midnight when I plugged the hard drive into her computer. A password prompt appeared immediately. Martha, who'd stayed late to wait for me, pulled up a password recovery program. Let's see what we've got. Password hint says her favorite hymn. We tried several combinations. Amazing Grace. Blessed Assurance. How Great Thou Art. Nothing worked. Wait, Martha said. What year was your grandmother born? 1952. She typed Amazing Grace 1952 and hit enter. The drive unlocked. Files cascaded across the screen. Folders labeled by year going back 20 years. Spreadsheets with transaction details, scanned documents, bank statements, and one folder that made my stomach drop: life insurance. Martha started clicking through the financial records. Every withdrawal from the trust was documented here with the real purposes listed beside the official ones. Community Thanksgiving event was actually Claire's credit card debt. Winter Hearts Fund was actually new car for Patricia. Family emergency relief was actually vacation to Aruba. 20 years of systematic theft meticulously documented. Your father kept records of everything, Martha said softly, but something was nagging at me. I voiced the thought that had been building since the parking garage. If he's been documenting for 3 years, why did the abuse of my son continue? He knew what was happening. He had evidence. He could have stopped it. Martha leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. Either he's a coward who let it happen because he was too afraid to act, or he's strategic and let it continue to build evidence. Either way, Margaret, your son paid the price for his choices. I stared at the screen at the folder labeled life insurance and felt something shift inside me. My father's tears in the hospital corridor, his confession of being controlled, the hard drive with 3 years of documentation. Was he a victim trying to break free? Or was this another layer of manipulation? Open the life insurance folder, I said. Martha double-clicked. Inside were scanned policies all related to my grandmother. I saw my grandmother's name, the policy amount, the beneficiaries. And then I saw something that made my hands go numb. Before Martha could analyze it further, my doorbell camera app pinged on my phone. Someone was at my front door. I pulled up the video feed. Claire stood on my porch, mascara streaking down her face, hands shaking as she rang the bell again and again. Even through the grainy camera footage, I could see she was crying. My phone rang. Claire's number. I answered. Claire, what's wrong? Meg, please. I need to see you. I need to tell you the truth. Her voice was raw, desperate. I need to tell you the truth about who I really am. I told Martha I had to go and drove home faster than I should have. Claire was still on my porch, pacing back and forth, her perfect composure completely shattered. When she saw my headlights, she ran toward my car before I'd even put it in park. Meg, thank God. I didn't know where else to go. I unlocked the door and let her inside. She collapsed onto my couch, her entire body shaking. This wasn't the polished, condescending sister who'd rolled her eyes at me on Thanksgiving. This was someone on the edge of a breakdown. Talk, I said, sitting across from her. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and opened her banking app. I need you to see something. She scrolled through credit card statements and my stomach turned. Chase 14 327ers. American Express $11 $8.92. Discover $8 $4.56. Capital One $6 $2.34. Bank of America $4 $8.91. Citibank $2 $115. The numbers kept coming, a cascade of debt that totaled $47,000. Claire, what is this? This is what it costs to be Mom's perfect daughter. Her voice was hollow. The designer clothes, the expensive brunches at the country club, the luxury vacations she insists we take so the family looks successful. She doesn't pay for any of it, Meg. She just says, use your cards, you're a Bennett, we have standards to maintain. She swiped to her text messages and showed me a thread with our mother. Message after message of directives disguised as suggestions. Those shoes won't do for the charity luncheon. Get the Louboutins. Claire, you looked frumpy at church. We need to go shopping this week. Don't embarrass us by looking poor. People are watching. Does your husband know? I asked. He thinks we're living off my trust fund income. That's what Mom told me to tell him. She laughed bitterly. There is no trust fund income, Meg. There never was. It's all a lie Mom created to explain our lifestyle. The trust money goes to her and Dad. I get debt and the privilege of looking successful. I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long has this been going on? Since I got married. 12 years. She wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheek. I tried to stop. 3 years ago, I told Mom I couldn't keep spending like this. She said if I embarrassed the family by dressing like a peasant, she'd make sure everyone knew what a failure I was. She'd tell my husband about the debt. She'd tell the church I was stealing from the family. She'd destroy me. So you stayed trapped. Just like you. Just like Dad. She traps all of us. Claire took a shaky breath. But Meg, there's something else. Something worse. She opened a different app and pulled up a group text thread. You were never added to this chat. It's just Mom, Dad, me, and Pastor Morrison. I took her phone and started reading. The messages were clinical calculating, devoid of any warmth or family feeling. My mother's texts referred to me as the spare wallet and our insurance policy. I scrolled back 3 months and found a message that made my hands shake. Margaret got her bonus $8,000. Time for a family emergency. My father's response, "What's the emergency this time?" My mother, "Doesn't matter. She'll pay regardless." Pastor Morrison, "I can create documentation for the trust if needed." I kept scrolling, my vision blurring with rage. A message from last week just before Thanksgiving. If she resists the Thanksgiving cost, Thomas will use the grandson card. She always breaks for the child. They'd planned it. Every guilt trip, every manipulation, every carefully orchestrated crisis. They'd discussed it in a group chat like they were strategizing a business deal. Meg, I'm so sorry. Claire was crying openly now. I should have told you years ago, but I was scared and weak, and I told myself you were okay, you had your career, you were strong enough to handle it. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. Something inside me was crystallizing, shifting from grief and shock into something colder and more focused. Strategic clarity. There's more, Claire said, her voice urgent now. This Sunday, they're holding a huge fundraiser at the church, the Winter Hearts Charity Gala. They've been promoting it for weeks. Winter Hearts, I repeated. The same name from the fake fund in the trust documents. They're using Grandma's name and your nursing credentials. The whole community is coming. They're expecting $50,000 in donations. Claire leaned forward. Meg, they're using your name. The flyer says sponsored by the Bennett Family Legacy, and it has your photo, the one from when you got that Nursing Excellence Award last year. Mom told everyone you're organizing it. My blood ran cold. I'm not organizing anything. I didn't even know about it. I know, but the entire town thinks you are. Mom's been telling people you wanted to honor Grandma's memory by creating a winter relief fund for families in need. She's positioned you as the face of this event. Claire's hands were shaking again. You're not just the ATM anymore, Meg. You're the brand. And they're selling you to the whole town. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. My reflection looked back at me, and I barely recognized the woman I saw. How long had I been their product, their asset to leverage, their story to sell? I need to see that flyer, I said. Claire pulled it up on her phone. There I was, smiling in my nurse's uniform, the photo from the hospital's Community Service Award ceremony 6 months ago. The text read, "Join the Bennett family in honoring Eleanor Grace Bennett's legacy of warmth and community service, organized by Margaret Bennett, RN, charge nurse at Boston Memorial Hospital. All proceeds benefit local families in crisis." They'd weaponized my reputation, my career, my face. And they'd done it without asking, without telling me, without any concern for what it would cost me when the truth came out. My phone buzzed, a text message from my mother. I opened it. If you show up at church Sunday and cause a scene, you'll regret it. You have too much to lose. I stared at those words. The threat was clear. If I confronted them publicly, they'd destroy my nursing career, my reputation, everything I'd built over 27 years. They'd paint me as unstable, vengeful, a liar trying to ruin a respected family's charitable work. But as I stood there holding my phone with Claire crying on my couch and my son in a hospital bed 3 miles away, I realized something important. I had already lost everything that mattered. They'd taken it piece by piece over decades. My self-respect, my boundaries, my ability to say no. And they'd nearly taken my son's life. The only thing left to lose was my fear. I texted back, "See you Sunday." Sunday morning, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual comfortable clothes, but in the navy suit I wore for professional presentations. I wanted to look like what I was, a charge nurse with 27 years of experience, someone who knew how to stay calm in a crisis. Martha picked me up at 9. In the back seat was Rebecca Kim, a journalist for the Boston Herald. I'd met Rebecca 4 years ago when her mother was dying in my ICU. We'd sat together through those final nights, and I'd held her hand when her mother took her last breath. She'd told me then, "If you ever need anything, call me." I'd called her yesterday. The church parking lot was packed. Cars lined the street for 2 blocks. Inside, the sanctuary had been transformed into something that looked more like a luxury wedding than a Sunday service. White tablecloths covered tables arranged in elegant rows. Candles flickered in silver holders. At the front, a massive screen displayed a slideshow of my grandmother, Eleanor Grace Bennett, smiling in photos I'd never seen before, with captions like, "Her legacy of warmth lives on," and "A life of generosity." We slipped into the back row. I counted roughly 200 people in attendance, nearly filling the church. I recognized faces from the community, business owners, teachers, the mayor, people I'd seen at the grocery store or the hospital cafeteria. All of them dressed in their Sunday best, all of them here to donate to a cause that didn't exist. My parents stood near the front working the room like politicians. My mother wore a dove-gray dress that probably cost $2,000, pearls at her throat. She moved from person to person with practiced grace, touching arms, laughing at jokes, playing the role of gracious benefactor. My father stood beside the display about my grandmother, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit, greeting people with the warm authority of a man who'd spent 40 years as their trusted pharmacist. Pastor Morrison stepped to the podium at exactly 10 o'clock. She looked serene in her white robes, her silver hair catching the light. "Good morning, friends. What a beautiful gathering this is. We're here today to honor Eleanor Bennett, a woman who believed in the power of community, who understood that warmth isn't just physical, it's the love we extend to those in need." The crowd murmured agreement. Pastor Morrison continued, "The Bennett family has carried on Eleanor's legacy through the Winter Hearts Fund, providing assistance to families in crisis, helping our neighbors through the coldest seasons of life. Today we celebrate their generations of generosity and ask you to join us in this mission." She smiled at my parents, who nodded humbly. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of emotion tastefully displayed. "Before we move to our giving portion," Pastor Morrison said, "I'd like to open the floor for anyone who wants to share a memory of Eleanor or speak to the impact of the Winter Hearts Fund." I stood up. The movement was slight, but in the silence of the sanctuary it felt enormous. Heads turned. I saw my mother's eyes widen, then narrow. My father's face went carefully blank. I walked down the center aisle, not aggressive, not hesitant. The same way I walk into a patient's room during a code blue-focused, purposeful, ready to do what needs to be done. Martha and Rebecca followed at a distance, Rebecca with her phone already recording. "I'd like to share my grandmother's real voice today," I said when I reached the front. My voice carried in the acoustics of the sanctuary. Most of you knew her as generous, warm, loving. But there's something you haven't heard. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the church's audio system. The pastor had left it open, probably expecting someone to play a song or read from a prepared statement. Instead, my grandmother's voice filled the sanctuary, thin and shaky, recorded on a device my father had kept hidden for years. Thomas keeps pushing me to sign papers I don't understand. I'm scared. But he says it's for the family's future. He says if I don't sign, everything will fall apart. I don't know what to do anymore. The date stamp on the recording was clear March 2014, 9 months before my grandmother died. The room erupted in whispers. I let them process for a moment, then continued. Those papers transferred her entire estate into a trust controlled by my parents. My grandmother died in December 2014. I was named the primary beneficiary, but I never received a single document until 4 days ago. My mother stood up, her face pale but her smile still in place. It was the smile of someone who'd played this game for decades, who knew how to perform under pressure. Darling, you're clearly experiencing a mental health crisis. Everyone here knows how stress can make us imagine things. She turned to the crowd, her voice dripping with concerned sympathy. My daughter has been struggling since her divorce. We've been supporting her financially and emotionally. Watching her break down like this is heartbreaking. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. I saw doubt creeping into faces that had been friendly moments before. This was the power of reputation, my mother's 40 years of carefully constructed image against my 30 seconds of accusation. But I'd been a nurse for 27 years. I knew how to present evidence that couldn't be argued with. Martha, the projector, please. Martha connected her laptop to the church's projection system. Bank statements filled the screen behind me, blown up large enough for everyone to read. I walked through them methodically, pointing to specific transactions. $8,000 withdrawn from my grandmother's trust, dated November 15th of last year. The official notation says, Community Thanksgiving Event. The actual notation from the bank's internal records, which I subpoenaed, says Personal Expense Bennett Family Holiday. I moved to the next slide. $12,000 September 3rd this year. Official notation, Winter Hearts Emergency Relief. Actual notation, Vehicle Purchase Patricia Bennett Mercedes SUV. The whispers grew louder. I saw people leaning forward, squinting at the numbers. And here's today's event. I continued, pulling up the budget Martha had obtained through a public records request. The church had filed the event with the city for a permit. You're being asked to donate $50,000 to the Winter Hearts Fund. But my parents have already withdrawn $35,000 from my grandmother's trust to pay for this event. The catering, the flowers, the programs you're holding, all funded by money that was supposed to be mine for a charity that doesn't exist. Pastor Morrison's face had gone from serene to ash gray. She gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. My mother's smile never wavered. She stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was silk and steel. Margaret, let's discuss this privately, shall we? There's no need to continue embarrassing yourself in front of the entire community. But I was done being managed, manipulated, and made to feel like I was the problem. No, Mother, I said quietly. We're going to discuss this right here in front of everyone you've been lying to for years. The church emptied within 20 minutes. People left without donating, without speaking to my parents, many of them avoiding eye contact entirely. Pastor Morrison disappeared into her office. My father stood frozen by the grandmother's memorial display, and my mother maintained her smile until the last person filed out. Only then did her mask crack just slightly at the corners. Martha, Rebecca, and I left through the side door. Rebecca had everything she needed for her article. This runs tomorrow, she said, front page. Back at Martha's office, we spread the contents of my father's hard drive across her conference table. Martha had called in David Chen, her forensic accountant, a thin man in his 40s who looked at financial documents the way I looked at patient charts, seeing patterns invisible to untrained eyes. David had been working through the trust amendments for an hour when he suddenly went still. Martha, come look at this. We gathered around his laptop. He'd pulled up the signature analysis software displaying multiple signatures side by side. Thomas Bennett's signature from his pharmacy license dated 1978, his signature on church volunteer forms from various years, and the signatures on the trust amendments. "These aren't your mother's signatures," David said, highlighting specific strokes and pressure points. "Look at the lowercase t formation, the way the N connects to the E. These are all your father's handwriting disguised to look feminine." Martha leaned closer. "You're sure?" 98% confidence level. "He's been forging these documents for at least 15 years. David pulled up another overlay, this time showing the progression of the forgeries. "He got better at it over time, more practiced. But the underlying structure is always his." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily in the nearest chair. The confession in the parking garage, the tears, him saying my mother controlled everything. "Performance," Martha said quietly. "He's not the silent victim, Margaret. He's the architect." David continued clicking through files, his expression growing darker. "There's something else. A reverse mortgage on your grandmother's house originated in March 2016. "That's 4 months after she died," I said. "Exactly. The house was appraised at $680,000. He borrowed $400,000 against it." David pulled up the loan documents. The application includes a power of attorney allegedly signed by Eleanor Bennett, giving Thomas authority to make financial decisions on her behalf. Martha took the laptop and examined the notary seal. "Pastor Morrison notarized this. The date on the signature is February 14, 2015. My grandmother died December 9, 2014, I said. "That's 2 months after she was buried." The room went silent. This wasn't sloppy fraud or opportunistic theft. This was calculated, methodical, long-term financial abuse, orchestrated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit trust authority and religious respectability. "Your mother's name doesn't appear on any of these documents," David said, scrolling through the mortgage papers. "She's not on the power of attorney, not on the loan application, not listed as a beneficiary. If this goes to court, she has plausible deniability. She can claim she didn't know." "She was the decoy," Martha said. "Everyone watched her. The controlling mother, the demanding wife, the puppet master. Meanwhile, your father operated the machinery behind the scenes." David opened another folder, this one labeled Portland Household Expenses. Monthly automated payments of $3,200 to an address on Willow Creek Drive, Portland, Oregon. I watched him pull up property records. The house was owned by Bennett Family Trust, LLC, purchased in 2009 for $450,000. "That's the year after Claire was born," I said numbly. David continued digging. Utility bills in my father's name, property tax payments. And then he found the school records tuition payments to Forest Heights Academy, a private school in Portland. 2 students currently enrolled, Emma Crawford, age 14, and Lucas Crawford, age 12. Crawford, not Bennett. Different last name. "Margaret," David said carefully. "It appears your father has been maintaining a second household in Portland for at least 16 years. These children would have been born in 2010 and 2012. I stared at the screen at the addresses and account numbers and automated payments that told a story I couldn't quite process. "Dad has another family. And he's been funding both families with your grandmother's money," Martha said. "The trust withdrawals, the reverse mortgage, the money he took from you, it wasn't just about maintaining their lifestyle in Boston. It was about supporting an entirely separate life across the country." I thought about the confession in the parking garage, about how convinced I'd been that he was trapped, controlled, desperate. I thought about the hard drive he'd pressed into my hands like it was salvation. Every word had been calculated. Every tear had been strategic. He'd positioned himself as the victim so I'd protect him when everything fell apart. My phone rang. My mother's number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Margaret." Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, small, broken, stripped of all performance. "Can we talk? Just you and me, I think. I think I'm ready to tell you everything." I told my mother I'd meet her tomorrow and hung up. Before I could process what she'd said, my phone rang again. Dr. Patel this time. "Margaret, I have Danny's blood panel results, and the comparison sample from your sister." My heart started pounding. Go ahead. I'm required to tell you this, Dr. Patel said carefully. The woman who volunteered as a donor, Claire Bennett, shares no maternal genetic markers with your son. In standard sibling genetics, we'd expect to see at least 25% overlap through the maternal line. They show 0%. The office seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of Martha's desk. What does that mean, doctor? Patel's voice was gentle, the tone doctors use when delivering news that changes everything. It means Claire is not your mother's biological daughter. You and Claire have different mothers. Same father. I sat there holding the phone, unable to speak. Martha was watching me, concerned. David had stopped typing. Margaret, are you there? Yes. Thank you for calling. I ended the call and looked at Martha. Claire isn't my sister. Not fully. We have the same father, different mothers. Martha's expression shifted to understanding. The Portland family. Diana Crawford. Claire is hers. My father had an affair, got her pregnant, and somehow convinced my mother to raise the child. I felt numb, like my brain was protecting me from the full weight of what I was learning. 33 years. My mother has been raising my father's affair child for 33 years. I called Claire. Where are you? Home. Why? What's wrong? Meet me at the hospital chapel in 30 minutes. We need to talk. The hospital chapel was empty when I arrived, a small interfaith space with cushioned chairs and dim lighting designed for privacy and grief. Claire was already there, sitting in the front row, her perfect posture collapsed into something smaller. I sat beside her. We need to do a DNA test, an actual one. Her face crumbled instantly, and I knew. She already knew. How long have you known? I asked quietly. 3 years. Her voice was barely a whisper. I did 23andMe for fun, to find out if we had Italian ancestry or whatever. Instead, I got matched with a woman in Portland named Diana Crawford. 99.9% probability of maternal relationship. You contacted her. She told me everything. Dad had an affair in 1989. She got pregnant with me. He promised to leave Mom and marry her, build a life together. Claire's hands were shaking in her lap. But he never did. When I was 6 months old, he showed up at Diana's apartment and took me. Just took me. Told her if she tried to get me back, he'd use his reputation and his money to prove she was unfit. He'd make sure she never saw me again. I felt sick. And Mom, he convinced her to take me in. Told her it was the only way to save their marriage. Avoid the scandal, protect the family reputation. The church would forgive a man who made a mistake but took responsibility. They wouldn't forgive divorce and a broken home. Claire wiped her eyes. So Mom agreed. She raised me as punishment for his betrayal. The pieces were falling into place. The way my mother looked at Claire, sometimes with an expression I'd always thought was disappointment. It wasn't disappointment. It was pain. The way she'd treated Claire like a doll, something to dress up and display but never quite love. Claire wasn't her daughter. Claire was evidence of my father's infidelity, a living reminder of humiliation that my mother had to feed and clothe and pretend to love for over 3 decades. Every time she looks at me, Claire said, her voice breaking, she sees his affair. She sees the woman he chose over her. She sees her own weakness in agreeing to this. I'm not her daughter, Meg. I'm evidence of her humiliation. I took Claire's hands. They were ice cold. We were set against each other on purpose. You were the scapegoat, I was the cash cow. Different roles, same prison. He needed us divided so we wouldn't compare notes, wouldn't figure out the system. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was ashamed and scared. And I thought if I told you, you'd hate me for existing. You're a victim, Claire. Just like me. Just like Mom. The words felt strange in my mouth, defending the woman who'd spent my entire life manipulating and controlling me. She's not evil. She's broken. 34 years of swallowing Dad's lies, raising his affair child, watching him steal from his own mother while she played the role of supportive wife. She became what she had to become to survive. Claire looked at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. What do we do? We free her. We burn down the whole system Dad built. We stop him from doing this to anyone else. I squeezed her hands. But first we need to know everything. No more secrets. Tell me what else you know. Claire nodded slowly. There's something else. The Portland family, Diana, and the 2 kids, Emma and Lucas. One of them is sick. Really sick. Which one? Lucas, the 12-year-old boy. He has leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, diagnosed 2 years ago. Claire's voice was hollow. Dad's been using the trust fund to pay for experimental treatment. Clinical trials that aren't covered by insurance. Some kind of CAR T-cell therapy that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. I stared at her. He's been stealing my inheritance to pay for medical treatment for the son he had with his mistress. Half-brother, Claire said quietly. Our half-brother, who's dying. I woke Monday morning to my phone vibrating so violently it had moved halfway across my nightstand. 47 text messages, 32 missed calls, 15 voicemails. Every notification made my stomach tighten further. The first text was from a nurse I'd worked with for 12 years. Meg, what's going on? Your mom posted something and people are talking. I opened Facebook and found it immediately. The church's page, which had 18,000 members across the Boston suburbs, featured a pinned video posted at 6:30 that morning. The title made my blood run cold. A mother's heartbreak, mental illness, and family betrayal. I pressed play. My mother sat in her living room, the one with the cream-colored sofa and the tasteful artwork, natural light streaming through the windows behind her. She wore a simple sweater, no jewelry, her face bare of the usual careful makeup. She looked vulnerable, human, heartbroken. I'm Patricia Bennett, she began, her voice shaking just enough to sound authentic. And I need to talk about something that's breaking my heart. My daughter Margaret is suffering. Since her divorce 3 years ago, she's struggled with paranoia and instability. We've tried everything to help her paying her bills when she fell behind taking care of her son, when her work schedule overwhelmed her, supporting her emotionally through this difficult time. She paused to wipe her eyes with a tissue. But yesterday she disrupted our church's charity event with wild accusations. She claims we stole from her, that we abused her son, that we're running some kind of fraud. None of it is true. The more we try to help, the more she demands. The more we give, the angrier she becomes. Her voice broke. I'm speaking publicly because I'm scared. Scared for her. Scared for my grandson. Mental illness is real and it's destroying my family. If you're watching this, please pray for Margaret. Pray that she gets the help she needs before something terrible happens. The video ended with my mother's face frozen in an expression of maternal anguish. Below it, the comments section was exploding. 3,400 shares, 892 comments. I scrolled through them, each one a small knife. Praying for your family, Patricia. Mental health is so important. I've always thought Margaret seemed unstable. This explains so much. What a strong woman you are to speak out about this. Your daughter is lucky to have you. My phone rang. Sarah Chen, a colleague from the ER. I answered. Hey Meg, I just saw your mom's video. Are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? I can give you the number for the hospital's EAP counselor if you want some professional help. Professional help. She was asking if I needed a psychiatrist. Sarah, it's not true. None of it is true. Okay. Her voice had that careful neutrality people use when they don't believe you but don't want to upset you further. Well, if you need anything, I'm here. She hung up quickly, and I knew. She believed my mother. Everyone would believe my mother because Patricia Bennett had spent 40 years building credibility, while I'd spent 27 years being too busy saving other people's lives to protect my own reputation. The calls kept coming. Danny's school counselor wanted to schedule an emergency meeting about custody stability concerns. My apartment building manager called to say several residents had expressed worry about the situation. Even Mrs. Ruth, who'd witnessed Danny on the porch and called CPS herself, seemed hesitant when I spoke to her. "Honey, I just don't know what to believe anymore," Ruth said. "Your mother seems so genuine in that video, so heartbroken. Could there have been some kind of misunderstanding? I watched my reputation crumble in real time. 27 years of nursing excellence, of showing up for every shift, of holding patients' hands as they died, and teaching new nurses how to start difficult IVs, all of it dissolving in 24 hours, because my mother knew exactly how to weaponize vulnerability. This was the price of challenging a narcissistic family system. They would burn you publicly rather than admit private truth. Martha came to my apartment that evening, her expression grim. "Don't respond publicly. Not yet. Everyone thinks I'm having a breakdown." "Good. Let them think it." She sat across from me at my kitchen table. "They want you emotional and defensive. That plays perfectly into the unstable daughter narrative. Every statement you make right now will be analyzed for signs of instability. Every defense will sound like denial. So I just let this destroy me? No, you let them think they're winning." Martha pulled out her laptop. "Rebecca Kim has been investigating the Winter Hearts Fund independently. She discovered it's not registered as a 501c3 nonprofit. Every donation that went into it went into a personal checking account controlled by your father. That's fraud. Tax fraud charity, fraud, wire fraud if anyone donated online." "When does her article run?" "Month 72 hours. Thursday morning, front page of the Metro section. She's calling it financial fraud hidden behind church charity and investigation. She has bank records, interviews with donors, everything." Martha looked at me seriously. "Margaret, your mother's video is going to spread. More people will believe it. You'll get more calls questioning your sanity. And then on Thursday, the truth hits. The contrast will be devastating for them. So I do nothing. You let them dig their own grave. Your mother just went on video claiming you're mentally ill and making false accusations. When Rebecca's article proves those accusations are true, your mother becomes the liar. Not just wrong, actively, deliberately deceptive." I nodded slowly, understanding the strategy but hating the waiting. What if people don't believe it even then? They will. Because Rebecca has documentation. Bank statements don't have mental breakdowns. Forensic accounting doesn't need therapy. Martha gathered her things to leave, and I walked her to the door. As she stepped into the hallway, I suddenly remembered something and called after her, deliberately raising my voice. "Martha, wait. Can I call you back in 5 minutes? I need to check something about the timeline for Thursday." "Sure," Martha said, playing along without missing a beat. "Call my cell." She left, and I walked back into my apartment, leaving my phone on the kitchen counter. I went to the bedroom to check on Danny, who was drawing pictures of dinosaurs on his art pad, fully recovered from the pneumonia. In the kitchen, my phone sat on speaker mode, volume turned up high. On the other side of the wall in the apartment my mother had rented 2 days ago, the unit directly adjacent to mine, I knew she was listening. I'd seen her move in yesterday, watched her carry boxes inside with that practiced fragility, playing the role of the concerned mother who needed to be close to her troubled daughter. Now she would hear everything. Every plan, every strategy, every piece of evidence we had. And she would make her next move exactly as I expected her to. Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in Martha's office reviewing Rebecca's draft article when her assistant knocked on the door, face pale. "Martha, there are 3 FBI agents in the lobby. They're asking for both of you." My first thought was that my mother had somehow turned this around, convinced federal authorities that I was the criminal. But when the agents entered, the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, extended her hand to me. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Special Agent Carol Reeves. This is Agent Park and Agent Williams. We're here about your father, Thomas Bennett." Not me. My father. Agent Reeves sat down and opened a briefcase, pulling out a thick file. "We've been investigating an illegal online gambling operation targeting senior citizens for 8 months. The case broke open when Harold Simmons, 73 years old, died by suicide last August. He left a note. She slid a photocopy across the table. I recognized the shaky handwriting of someone elderly, someone who'd lost hope. I can't live with what I've done. I lost everything: the house, the savings, Mary's future. Thomas Bennett promised it was a safe investment. He said I could trust him because we were church family. I trusted him, and now there's nothing left. I'm sorry, Mary. I'm so sorry. My hands trembled holding the note. Harold Simmons, I saw that name in the trust documents. His widow provided us with email records. Your father was the primary contact for what Mr. Simmons believed was a community investment program. We've since identified 23 victims, all elderly, all members of your parents' church or associated with it through social connections. Agent Reeves pulled out bank statements. The Winter Hearts Fund appears in 16 of these victims' financial records as the initial transaction. A small charitable donation, usually between $500 and $2,000. It established trust. Then what? Martha asked. Then over the following months, your father would introduce what he called the Community Investment Circle. And he'd pitch it as a special opportunity for church members, only a way to generate supplemental retirement income through collective investment strategies. Agent Reeves used air quotes, her expression disgusted. What it actually was online sports betting with rigged odds. He'd set up accounts for them, tell them which games to bet on, convince them that the system was foolproof. Agent Park pulled up a laptop and showed us a spreadsheet. Names, amounts, dates. The numbers were staggering. When people started losing money, Bennett would offer them loans from what he called the family trust. 0 interest payable whenever they recovered their losses. But of course they never recovered. They just got deeper in debt. He'd pressure them to double down, Agent Williams added. Tell them this next bet was guaranteed, that they just needed to commit more to win back what they'd lost. Classic gambling addiction manipulation, except he was creating the addiction deliberately. I felt sick. How much total? $1.2 million in confirmed losses. And that's just what we've documented so far. Agent Reeves looked at me carefully. Ms. Bennett, we know you provided your attorney with a hard drive containing financial records. We'd like access to that drive. Martha and I exchanged glances. What's on that drive is evidence of trust fund fraud and embezzlement, Martha said. How does it relate to gambling? According to our forensic accountant, that drive contains the complete financial ledger we've been trying to reconstruct for months. Money flow from the trust to victims, from victims to offshore gambling sites, from gambling sites back to accounts controlled by your father. It's the missing link in our prosecution. I thought about my father in the parking garage, tears streaming down his face, pressing that drive into my hands. He gave it to me thinking it was evidence against my mother. He didn't realize he was documenting his own crimes. That's our assessment as well. Agent Reeves leaned forward. Ms. Bennett, we need your full cooperation. In exchange, we'll grant you immunity for anything you unknowingly participated in: transfers, account access, anything. We believe you're a victim, not an accomplice, but we need everything you have. She's been recording conversations for 2 weeks, Martha said. Audio files with timestamps. Agent Reeves looked impressed. You've been documenting? I'm a nurse. Documentation is survival. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recordings folder. I have my father's confession in the parking garage, my mother's threats, Claire's testimony about the debt and the group chat, everything. We'd like you to wear a wire for any future family interactions, Agent Park said. I've already been recording everything on my phone, but I'll wear whatever equipment you want. Agent Williams pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table. It showed Pastor Morrison at a church social event, smiling warmly at an elderly couple. Pastor Elaine Morrison received a 10% commission for every person she recruited into the investment circle. She used her position as spiritual advisor to gain access to members' financial information, then fed that data to your father. She authenticated fraudulent trust documents, provided religious cover for the operation, and actively recruited victims through church social groups. I stared at the photo. The woman who'd baptized my son, who'd counseled me through my divorce, who everyone called a pillar of the community. How many people did she recruit? I asked. 14 confirmed so far. She made approximately $120,000 over 3 years. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air harder to breathe. My father hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built an enterprise that destroyed lives, that drove a 73-year-old man to suicide, that weaponized faith and community trust for profit. Agent Reeves closed her briefcase and stood. "We'll be in touch about next steps. But Ms. Bennett, there's one more thing." She paused, and something in her expression made my blood run cold. "We need to exhume your grandmother's body. We have reason to believe her death wasn't natural." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. "What reason?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Your father's records include a file labeled life insurance. Inside are notes about medications, dosages, and timelines that correspond with your grandmother's final months. Combined with witness testimony we've received, we have probable cause to believe Eleanor Bennett was poisoned." The exhumation hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Sandra Mitchell from CPS called and asked me to come to her office. 3 weeks had passed since that first visit to my home, 3 weeks of interviews and investigations and waiting. I sat across from Sandra in her small, cluttered office. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too much darkness in the world. She opened a thick file folder and met my eyes. "Margaret, I've completed the investigation. I interviewed all 7 grandchildren in your extended family, your son Danny Claire's 3 children, and your 2 cousins' kids who also spent time with your parents." My stomach tightened. "And every single child reported being punished by standing outside in the cold. Every single one." She pulled out interview transcripts. The infractions varied: talking back, not finishing dinner, making too much noise, making grandma upset. The duration ranged from 15 minutes to over 2 hours. Temperatures between 35 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I thought of Danny on that porch 47 minutes in 28-degree weather. Over 2 hours. Your cousin Lisa's daughter, age 10. She was outside for 2 hours and 17 minutes last winter because she spilled juice on the carpet. She was wearing a dress and tights, no coat. Sandra's voice was steady professional, but I could hear the anger underneath. What concerns me most is that these children had been conditioned to believe this was normal. They used phrases like, makes you stronger, and builds character. 2 of them showed significant anxiety when discussing winter weather. One started shaking when I mentioned snow. I closed my eyes. PTSD responses. In children. Because my parents had systematically traumatized them under the guise of discipline. Sandra continued reading from her report. This constitutes a systematic pattern of intentional child endangerment spanning at least 8 years. The cold exposure was used as behavioral control, not discipline. The consistency across multiple children, the concealment from parents, and the threats used to ensure silence all indicate premeditation and awareness of wrongdoing. Threats. Your nephew Jake told me that Grandpa said if any of them told their parents, he'd prove the parents were bad and the children would be sent to foster care. He said foster care was where bad kids go when their parents can't take care of them anymore. My hands clenched into fists. My father had used the same system that was supposed to protect children as a weapon to keep them silent. He'd terrorized them with the threat of separation from their parents if they revealed the abuse. "I'm filing charges," Sandra said. "Child abuse, multiple counts. Criminal child endangerment, multiple counts. And conspiracy to commit child abuse against both Thomas and Patricia Bennett. Both of them. Your mother was present for at least half of these incidents. She facilitated, encouraged, and defended the practice, under law that makes her equally culpable." Sandra leaned forward. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. When you first showed me that evidence with the ring footage, and the text messages and your medical records, I doubted you. Your parents had 30 years of community standing. You were emotional. I thought maybe there was some truth to what your father said about your mental state." The admission stung even though I'd known she'd doubted me. I was wrong. About everything. You were right, and I'm sorry we didn't act faster. She closed the file. 7 children were being abused, and we initially questioned the one person trying to stop it. That's on me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The district attorney will be in touch about the criminal case. Given the FBI investigation into your father's financial crimes, everything will likely be coordinated. But Margaret, you did the right thing. You protected these children. I left her office and sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. I'd done it. I'd proven the abuse. I'd gotten charges filed. I'd protected the children. So why did I feel like I'd lost everything? Claire was waiting at my apartment when I got home. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. What happened? CPS is filing charges. All 7 kids, 8 years of systematic abuse. Sandra confirmed everything. I pulled back and looked at her. We did it. We stopped them. Then why do you look like someone died? Because someone did. The family I thought I had, the parents I believed they could be, the childhood I told myself wasn't that bad, all of it died. I sat down heavily on the couch. I just proved my own parents are criminals who tortured children. How do I live with that? Claire sat beside me. We did the right thing. We stopped it. Those kids are safe now. At what cost? I gestured around us. The family we knew is gone, replaced by criminal defendants and federal investigations and exhumation orders. Everything is destroyed. It was already destroyed, Meg. We just stopped pretending it wasn't. Claire took my hand. And those kids get to grow up without being locked outside in the cold. Danny gets to grow up knowing his mother protected him. That's worth everything. I looked at her, this sister who wasn't fully my sister, this woman who'd been trapped in the same system from a different angle. When did you get so wise? When I realized I had a sister who was brave enough to burn down the whole system to save her son. You taught me that protection is more important than comfort. I squeezed her hand and thought of Danny upstairs drawing pictures of dinosaurs smiling again, his lungs healed and his nightmares fading. Claire was right. Protection was more important than comfort. Truth was more important than peace. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your front porch. I walked to the door and opened it. My mother stood in the parking lot below, perfectly composed in a camel-colored coat, her expression unreadable. She looked up at me and spoke loudly enough for her voice to carry. You'll lose everything by Christmas, Margaret. I promise you that. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with those words echoing in the cold November air. My mother's threat hung in the air for 2 days. Then Sunday came, and with it the reckoning I'd been waiting for. I didn't go to church that morning. I'd stopped attending weeks ago, unable to sit in those pews knowing what I knew. But Rebecca Kim was there along with her photographer positioned discreetly in the back row. She called me at 10:45. It's happening. They just arrested Pastor Morrison. I put her on speaker so Martha and Claire could hear. Rebecca's voice was low, urgent. She'd just finished her sermon, something about forgiveness and family healing. The irony is almost too much, and she was greeting people at the front when 2 FBI agents walked down the center aisle. Everyone went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. What did they charge her with? Martha asked. Agent Reeves read it out loud. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, notary fraud, money laundering, and acting as an accomplice in elder financial exploitation. Then she said, and I quote, Pastor Morrison received $340,000 over 5 years as commission for recruiting elderly victims into a fraudulent investment scheme. I heard gasps and murmurs through Rebecca's phone, the sound of a congregation having its foundation shattered. They handcuffed her right there in front of everyone, Rebecca continued. The woman who baptized half their children, who officiated their weddings, who sat with them when their parents died. People are crying. Some are angry. Most just look shell-shocked. After Rebecca hung up, the 3 of us sat in silence. Pastor Morrison had been the moral authority, the spiritual guide, the person everyone trusted with their deepest secrets and greatest griefs, and she'd used all of it to identify marks for my father's schemes. The church board held an emergency meeting that afternoon. One of the board members, a man named David Walsh, whose mother had lost $30,000 to my father's investment circle, called Martha directly. "We need legal counsel," he said, his voice shaking. "The financial records show Pastor Morrison had access to everything. Member databases with income information, donation records, life event documentation. She knew who'd just received an inheritance, who'd lost a spouse who was vulnerable. She fed all of it to Thomas Bennett." Martha put him on speaker. "Did she use her notary seal?" "Multiple times. She authenticated the fraudulent trust documents, the fake power of attorney, everything. She weaponized her notary public authority." David's voice broke. "Our insurance company says they won't cover any of this. It was intentional criminal activity, not negligence. We're looking at civil suits from victims. The church might have to be sold." Over the next week, I watched from a distance as the congregation imploded. Families left in droves, unable to reconcile their faith with the institution that had harbored such corruption. The local news ran interviews with victims. An elderly woman named Grace Patterson spoke through tears. "She knew my husband's life insurance payout before I'd even told anyone. She came to my house 3 days after his funeral with casseroles and sympathy, and by the end of the visit, she knew every detail of my finances." 2 weeks later, Thomas Bennett called with an investment opportunity. She used my grief to set me up. The media coverage was relentless. Every day brought new revelations, new victims, new betrayals. And at the center of it all was the Bennett family name. My mother's carefully constructed social network evaporated overnight. The women who'd supported her video, who'd defended her in the comments, who'd promised to pray for her troubled daughter, all of them went silent. Phone calls went unreturned. Invitations were quietly rescinded. The social currency she'd spent 40 years accumulating became worthless in 72 hours. I saw her one Sunday leaving what remained of the church service. Only 30 people had attended, down from the usual 200. She walked to her car alone, shoulders bent in a way I'd never seen before. No one stopped to talk to her. No one even made eye contact. For just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. This woman who'd ruled her social sphere with such precision, who'd maintained appearances with such dedication, reduced to a pariah in the community she'd helped build. Then I thought of Danny's blue lips, the frostbite scars on Emma's arms, Harold Simmons' suicide note, Grace Patterson's tears, the 7 children who'd been systematically traumatized. The pity passed. My mother wasn't arrested. Her name didn't appear in the FBI charges. Legally, she had plausible deniability. She could claim she didn't know about the gambling scheme, the fraudulent documents, the systematic theft. But socially, she was finished. Sometimes the most effective isolation isn't legal prosecution, it's the complete withdrawal of community support. She was radioactive by association, and no amount of performance could save her now. On Tuesday morning, Martha called. "The FBI just executed a search warrant on your parents' house. They're going through everything: computers, file cabinets, bank records." "Did they find anything?" "That's why I'm calling. Agent Reeves wants to see you. They found something in the basement safe, something unexpected." I drove to Martha's office, where Agent Reeves was waiting with a cardboard evidence box. She pulled on latex gloves and carefully removed a leather journal, the kind with a lock and key. "We found this in a fireproof safe in the basement, along with life insurance policies and other documents. It's a journal kept by your grandmother, Eleanor Bennett. The entries span from 2010 to 2014. My heart started pounding. "What does it say?" Agent Reeves opened to a page marked with a yellow tab. "It documents her suspicions about your father's activities, his unexplained absences, large cash withdrawals she couldn't account for, phone calls he'd taken private, and toward the end, she flipped to the final entries. She describes feeling increasingly ill, nausea, confusion, numbness in her extremities. She writes that she asked your father about her symptoms, and he told her it was just her heart condition worsening. But Margaret, your grandmother, suspected something else." She turned the journal so I could see my grandmother's handwriting, shaky, but still legible. Thomas keeps insisting I take the new medicine he brought home. Says it will help my heart. But I feel worse every time I take it. Patricia watches him give it to me and says nothing. I'm scared. What if... The entry stopped mid-sentence. It was dated November 28, 2014, 11 days before she died. I held my grandmother's journal in my hands, reading those final words over and over. She'd known. In her last days, confused and frightened, she'd known someone was poisoning her. And she'd written it down, locked it away, a message in a bottle that had taken 10 years to reach me. 2 Sundays later, my father was arrested. He'd been attending church defiantly, as if his presence alone could restore his reputation. Playing the role of wrongly accused man seeking sanctuary, greeting people who wouldn't meet his eyes, sitting in his usual pew like nothing had changed. The FBI waited until after communion. Agent Reeves told me later, it was strategic maximum witnesses, minimal chance of escape, the symbolism of justice being served in the place where he'd hunted his victims. I was there in the back row with Martha and Claire. We watched as 2 agents walked down the center aisle, their footsteps echoing in the silence. My father stood as they approached, and for a moment I thought he might run. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and waited. Agent Reeves read the charges loud enough for everyone to hear. Wire fraud, 18 counts. Elder financial exploitation, 23 counts. Money laundering, 14 counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Forgery. And then the words that made the entire congregation gasp: voluntary manslaughter in connection with the death of Eleanor Grace Bennett. Someone screamed. An elderly woman in the 3rd row collapsed into her husband's arms. My father's face remained impassive, but I saw his hands shaking as Agent Reeves handcuffed him. Thomas Bennett, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. They led him out through the center aisle, past 200 witnesses, past the photos of church events on the walls where he smiled beside the people he'd destroyed. He didn't look at anyone. But as he passed our row, his eyes found mine for just a second. I couldn't read his expression. Regret. Defiance. Resignation. Then he was gone. The next morning, Rebecca's article ran on the front page. Trusted Pharmacist's 15-year fraud empire, how church became hunting ground. She'd documented everything, every victim, every scheme, every betrayal. Photos of Thomas at church picnics, Christmas services, charity events, always smiling, always trusted. The comments section filled within hours. He counseled my mother on her medications after Dad died. We trusted him with everything. I introduced him to my uncle. I'm the reason my uncle lost his retirement. How do we ever trust anyone again? The betrayal cut deeper than money. Thomas had used his profession, his faith, his community standing as camouflage for predation. He'd turned the church into a hunting ground and everyone in it into potential prey. 3 days after his arrest, my phone rang. My mother's number. I almost didn't answer. Margaret. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of every performance, every mask. They took him. In front of everyone. The house is being seized. All the accounts are frozen. I have nothing. I said nothing, just listened. I know you think I'm evil. But Margaret, I was afraid. For 34 years I was so afraid. Her voice cracked. He said if I ever left, he'd prove I was an unfit mother, that I was complicit in everything. He said no one would believe me. And he was right. Look how everyone believed him about you. The line went quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing ragged and uneven. I should have protected you, she whispered. I should have protected all of you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She hung up before I could respond. That night, Claire called me at 2 a.m. Meg, Mom's in the hospital. She had a stroke. I drove to the hospital not because I wanted to, but because Claire's voice on the phone had been so broken I couldn't ignore it. When I arrived, she was sitting in the waiting room, face-pale hands twisted together in her lap. They say it's minor, a small ischemic stroke. But Meg, she looked so small in that ambulance. Dr. Patel met us outside the room. The same doctor who'd treated Danny, who'd called me about the DNA results, who'd been present for so many turning points in this nightmare. He looked tired. The stroke was minor. No significant motor impairment, speech is intact, cognitive function appears normal, but Margaret, her cortisol levels are extremely elevated. Not just from this acute event, the patterns indicate chronic extreme psychological distress extending back years, possibly decades. He looked at me carefully. Stress can kill. Her body has been in fight or flight mode for so long it's starting to shut down. I stood in the doorway of her room, unable to make myself step inside. This woman who had seemed invincible my entire life, perfectly coiffed, perfectly controlled, always performing now, lay small and fragile against white sheets, monitors beeping softly around her. Her hair was gray at the roots where the dye had grown out. Her face without makeup showed every one of her 60 years. She wasn't just cruel, I realized. She'd been surviving. Claire touched my arm. She wants to talk to you. Just you. I walked in and sat in the chair beside the bed. My mother's eyes opened, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without any mask at all. No charm, no manipulation, no performance, just exhaustion. I was 23 when I married your father, she said, her voice hoarse. He was 35, a respected pharmacist, everyone's golden boy. My parents were so proud. She swallowed, wincing slightly. I didn't know about Diana until Claire was 6 months old. He brought her to me in a car seat. Just showed up one day and said, "You'll raise her, or I'll tell everyone you're infertile and an inadequate wife." I kept my face neutral, letting her talk. In 1989, that would have destroyed me. A woman who couldn't give her husband a child. A woman whose husband had to go elsewhere. The church would have pitied me, but they would have blamed me too. Her eyes closed. So I took her. I raised his affair child and told myself it was noble, sacrificial. But every time I looked at her, I saw my own humiliation. Mom, let me finish, please. She took a shaky breath. Every year, I told myself I'd leave next year. When you girls were older, when I had money saved, when I was brave enough. 34 years of next year. And then it was too late. I was too old, too complicit, too afraid. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. If I testify against him, if I tell them everything I know about the Portland family, about the gambling operation, about what happened to your grandmother, will you let me know my grandson? Not now. Someday. When he's old enough to decide if he wants to know me. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away from this woman who'd caused so much pain. But another part of me, the part that had held Danny through his nightmares and seen Claire's frostbite scars, understood something important. Victims can also be perpetrators. Abused people can become abusers. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, but it does mean seeing the whole truth. First, I said quietly, you tell me what really happened to Grandma. All of it. No more lies, no more protecting him. My mother's face crumpled and tears started falling. Your father poisoned her, slowly, for 6 months. I watched him do it. The words hung between us like a confession that couldn't be taken back. I watched him do it. My mother's hands trembled on the hospital blanket IV line, tugging slightly with each movement. Tell me everything, I said. From the beginning. She took a shaky breath. March 2015. I noticed your father in the bathroom late at night, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. White powder. When I asked what it was, he said it was a supplement to help your grandmother's circulation, something he'd compounded himself from his pharmacy days. I believed him at first. She paused, staring at her hands. Your grandmother's symptoms started a few weeks later. Nausea, confusion, numbness in her fingers and toes. The doctor said it was advanced heart failure, that her condition was deteriorating. But you knew better. I was a nursing assistant before I married your father. I'd seen enough cardiac patients to know something was wrong. The symptoms didn't match pure heart failure. They matched heavy metal poisoning. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I confronted him in May. He was in the bathroom again with that mortar and pestle, and I grabbed the container. Arsenic trioxide, an old cardiac medication from the 1970s, banned decades ago, but still in circulation if you knew where to look. My stomach turned. What did he say? He didn't deny it. He just looked at me and said, Mom is going to cut me out of the will. She found out about Portland. If she dies before she changes it, we keep everything. You want to live in an apartment on food stamps? You want everyone in town knowing our business? My mother's eyes filled with tears. He painted a picture of complete ruin. Said if his mother cut us off, we'd lose the house, the cars, our standing in the community. Everything we'd built. So you let him continue. I did worse than that. I became complicit. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Once I knew and didn't report it, I was trapped. If I went to the police, I'd go to prison too for not stopping it. If I told your grandmother, she'd cut us off immediately, and I'd have no resources to leave him. I'd be a 56-year-old woman with no work history, no money, and a criminal husband. So I did the most cowardly thing possible. I did nothing. For how long? 4 months. I watched him add that powder to her pills every morning. I watched her get weaker, more confused. I sat with her when she complained about the numbness, when she couldn't keep food down, when she started having seizures. My mother's voice broke completely. The last thing she said to me was 3 days before she died. She grabbed my hand and whispered, "Why won't you help me, Patricia?" She knew. She knew I was letting it happen. I sat there processing what I'd just heard. My grandmother's journal had documented her suspicions. My mother had just confirmed them. And my father had systematically murdered his own mother for money while his wife watched. I need to get Agent Reeves, I said. Special Agent Reeves arrived within the hour, along with another agent carrying recording equipment. They set up in my mother's hospital room, and for the next 2 hours my mother provided testimony that would seal my father's fate. She gave them dates. March 12, 2015 was the first time she saw him grinding the arsenic. May 19th was when she confronted him. She gave them locations: the pharmacy where my father had worked in 1978 when arsenic trioxide was still used in cardiac medications, the private storage unit on Maple Street where he might have kept old pharmaceutical supplies. She even gave them the name of the doctor who'd diagnosed my grandmother with heart failure, who'd never questioned the symptoms because Thomas Bennett, respected pharmacist, had assured him the progression was typical. And then she pulled out an old phone from her purse, one I'd never seen before. I saved his text messages. I was afraid, but I wasn't stupid. I knew someday I might need proof I was coerced. Agent Reeves scrolled through the messages, her expression darkening with each screen. Patricia, these are dated during your mother-in-law's final weeks. He was instructing me how to support the narrative, what to tell the doctor, what to say to Margaret and Claire, how to react at the funeral. My mother's voice was hollow. He choreographed everything. After Agent Reeves left, she pulled me aside in the hallway. Your mother's testimony, combined with the forensic evidence from the exhumation, just upgraded the charge from voluntary manslaughter to first-degree murder. Premeditation, deliberation, malice aforethought. Your father is going to die in prison, Margaret. I nodded, unable to speak. Agent Reeves continued. Your mother will likely face charges as an accessory after the fact, but her cooperation will matter. She'll serve time, but not life. I walked out to the parking lot as the sun was setting, my mind numb from everything I'd learned. My father was a murderer. My mother was an accomplice. My grandmother had died knowing the people she trusted most were killing her. I reached my car and stopped. A USB drive was taped to my windshield, a small yellow note attached. I pulled it off and read the handwriting. You think you know everything you don't. Watch this. A friend. I drove straight to Martha's office with the USB drive. It was 9 o'clock at night, but she answered on the first ring when I called. I'm here. Come up. She plugged the drive into her computer and we watched as folders populated the screen. Lab reports, forensic pathology findings, digital correspondence, photographs that made my stomach turn. Martha opened the pathology report first. The exhumation had been performed 3 weeks ago after Agent Reeves had obtained a court order based on my grandmother's journal and my mother's initial statement. Despite 9 years of decomposition, the forensic team had been able to extract bone and hair samples for analysis. The results were unequivocal. Arsenic levels in my grandmother's remains measured 47 times the acceptable limit for human tissue. The specific compound was arsenic trioxide, matching a discontinued cardiac medication called Fowler's solution, banned by the FDA in 1985, but still present in pharmaceutical inventories from that era. Martha pulled up my father's pharmacy license records. He worked at Riverside Pharmacy from 1978 to 2018. 40 years of access to controlled substances, including legacy medications that were supposed to be destroyed, but often weren't. The forensic pathologist's conclusion was clinical and damning. Death by intentional poisoning over approximately 120 days. The pattern of arsenic accumulation in bone tissue indicates regular sustained exposure consistent with daily administration. This was not accidental ingestion or environmental contamination. This was murder. I stared at the screen, seeing the scientific proof of what my mother had confessed. My father had killed his own mother slowly, methodically over 4 months while she grew weaker and more confused, while she wrote in her journal that she was scared while she begged for help that never came. Martha opened another folder labeled Digital Evidence. Email correspondence between my father and Pastor Morrison recovered from the pastor's computer that the FBI had seized. The timestamps made me feel sick. March 24, 2015, from Thomas to Pastor Morrison. Mother is declining faster than expected. We need to move the trust amendments through before hospice gets involved. They ask too many questions about medications and symptoms. April 18, 2015, from Pastor Morrison to Thomas. How much longer people at church are asking about Eleanor's appearance. She looks skeletal. I'm running out of excuses for why she's not attending services. April 22, 2015, from Thomas to Pastor Morrison. Another month at most. Just keep deflecting. Tell them she's too weak for visitors. The exchanges continued through November, a digital record of conspiracy and premeditation. Pastor Morrison hadn't just notarized fraudulent documents and recruited gambling victims. She'd been aware that my grandmother was being killed and had helped maintain the cover story. Who sent this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Martha checked the metadata. It was mailed from Portland, Oregon 4 days ago. Let me trace the return address. She pulled up property records and cross-referenced them with the information we already had about my father's second family. It's Diana Crawford's address. There was a letter file in the folder. Martha opened it and we read together. Thomas told me Eleanor's death was natural. Heart failure, he said. Quick and peaceful. When I saw the FBI investigation in the news last week, I remembered he'd left an old computer at our house from 2015. He said it was broken, asked me to throw it out, but I never did. I had our son's friend, who's good with computers, recover the files. What I found, I can't believe I'm reading. He kept detailed records of everything. The poisoning, the gambling schemes, the theft. All of it documented like a business ledger. My children loved him. They called him Dad. Now I have to tell them their father is a murderer. I'm sending you everything. Use this to make sure he never hurts anyone again. He doesn't deserve to see daylight. Diana Crawford. Martha closed the laptop and looked at me. The office was silent except for the hum of the computer and the distant sound of traffic outside. Margaret, she said quietly, you've won. Completely. The forensic evidence proves murder. The digital trail proves premeditation. Your mother's testimony provides motive and eyewitness confirmation. Diana's evidence shows your father documented his own crimes. There's no defense he can mount. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. But now comes the hardest part, Martha continued, her expression serious. Deciding what kind of person you become after winning. Revenge is easy, justice is necessary. But what comes after, that's the question you'll have to answer. I sat in Martha's office staring at Diana Crawford's letter, trying to process the magnitude of what we now had. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every document pointed to one inescapable conclusion: my father was a murderer, and there was no way out for him. Martha reopened her laptop and pulled up a different file. Before we talk about next steps, there's something I want to show you. Remember your mother's video, the one that went viral 3 weeks ago? I felt my jaw tighten. The one where she told 18,000 people I was having a mental breakdown. Hard to forget. Right. You thought it was a disaster, that it destroyed your reputation. Martha clicked play on an audio file. I heard my own voice crystal clear coming through her speakers. Martha, tomorrow I'm going to publicly confront Mom. I'm going to make it very uncomfortable for her. The recording was from my kitchen the day before the church confrontation, the day before my mother posted that video. Martha paused the playback. You knew she was listening through the wall. You knew she'd moved into the apartment next door. You created the conditions for her to panic. I nodded slowly. My mother is predictable. When threatened, she attacks. I needed her to attack me publicly to stake her entire reputation on the unstable daughter narrative. Because when the truth came out afterward, the FBI investigation, the murder charge, the financial fraud, her credibility would be destroyed beyond repair. Everyone who believed her video would feel betrayed. They wouldn't just stop trusting her, they'd actively resent being manipulated. You weaponized her own tactics against her, Martha said. I gave her a choice. She chose to lie publicly on video with thousands of witnesses. That was her decision, not mine. Martha leaned back in her chair. I want to make something clear because this matters legally and ethically. You didn't plan for her to post exactly that video. You created the probability. If she hadn't posted anything, we had backup plans. But she chose the path that hurt her most, which is what happens when someone operates from panic instead of strategy. You operated from patience. That's the difference between reactive abuse and strategic justice. I thought about the past 3 weeks. Every recording I'd made, every document I'd photographed, every conversation with law enforcement. I spent 30 years reacting to them, being defensive, apologizing, trying to explain myself. These past 3 weeks, I stopped reacting and started acting. I documented everything. I collaborated with the FBI. I protected Danny and the other children. That's not revenge. That's accountability. Exactly. Martha closed the laptop. But Margaret, I need to ask you something. How are you really doing? Because strategically you've won. Completely. But emotionally this has to be devastating. The question hit me harder than I expected. I took a breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I just helped put my father in prison for murder. I provided evidence that will keep him there until he dies. My mother is cooperating with prosecution to avoid her own charges, but she'll live with guilt and complicity forever. Pastor Morrison, who baptized Danny when he was 6 months old, is facing 15 years for elder exploitation. 23 elderly people lost their life savings because of my father's schemes. Harold Simmons is dead, and 7 children, including my son, will need therapy for years to process the trauma of systematic abuse. Martha reached across the desk and placed her hand on mine. You didn't cause any of that. Thomas did. You just stopped it from continuing. There's a difference between causing pain and revealing it. I know. Intellectually, I know. But Martha, I destroyed my family. The structure that's existed for decades, toxic as it was, is gone. My father will die in prison. My mother will probably serve time. Claire is rebuilding her entire life. The cousins are in therapy. The church is selling its building, and I'm the one who set all of this in motion." "No," Martha said firmly. "Your father set this in motion when he started poisoning his own mother, when he built a gambling empire that exploited vulnerable seniors, when he locked children outside in freezing weather. You didn't create the destruction, Margaret. You just turned on the lights so everyone could see what was already there." Before I could respond, Martha's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "It's the prosecutor's office." She answered on speaker. "Ms. Chen, this is ADA Jennifer Lawson. We're scheduling the preliminary hearing for Thomas Bennett. It'll be in 6 weeks. We'd like to know if your client Margaret Bennett plans to attend. Mr. Bennett will be present. They'll be in the same room." Martha looked at me, eyebrows raised in question. I thought about my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me study for chemistry tests, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding. That man had never really existed. He'd been a performance, a mask covering something much darker. "Tell them yes," I said. "I'll be there." 6 weeks after that phone call, I walked into County Superior Court with Claire beside me and Martha just ahead. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., but the courtroom was already packed by 8:30. I recognized faces from the church, from the community, from the hospital where I worked. Victims' families sat in clusters, some holding hands, some staring straight ahead with expressions of grim determination. Journalists lined the back row, notebooks, open cameras prohibited, but pens moving constantly. The purpose of this hearing was straightforward: determine if sufficient evidence existed to proceed to trial. I knew the answer already. We all did. But the legal system required this step, this formal presentation of facts before a judge. My father was already seated at the defense table when we entered. Orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. The contrast to the man I'd known my entire life was so stark, it almost didn't seem real. Thomas Bennett, respected pharmacist, church deacon, pillar of the community, reduced to a defendant in county jail clothes. His attorney, Mark Stevens, sat beside him looking like a man who'd been handed an impossible task. Stevens was a public defender in his 50s, competent but overwhelmed, and I could see in his posture that he knew this case was unwinnable. Claire and I sat in the second row. Our mother wasn't there. The prosecutor had deemed her too fragile to attend in person, though she'd provided video testimony that would be played if needed. I was grateful for her absence. I didn't know if I could sit in the same room with both my parents and maintain my composure. Judge Patricia Hamilton entered and we all stood. She was in her 60s, gray-haired and no-nonsense, with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. She took her seat and gestured for us to sit. The People versus Thomas Edward Bennett. Preliminary hearing to determine probable cause for trial. Her voice was clear and authoritative. Assistant District Attorney Lawson, you may proceed. Jennifer Lawson stood, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a methodical approach. She began reading the charges, and the list seemed to go on forever. Count 1, first-degree murder in the death of Eleanor Grace Bennett. Counts 2 through 24, elder financial exploitation of 23 victims. Counts 25 through 38, wire fraud. Counts 39 through 52, money laundering. Counts 53 through 59, child endangerment of 7 minors. Count 60, conspiracy to commit fraud. She presented the evidence piece by piece. The forensic pathology report showing arsenic levels 47 times the acceptable limit in my grandmother's remains. The financial ledgers from the hard drive my father had given me documenting every fraudulent transaction. Victim testimony, including widow Mary Simmons, reading her husband's suicide note aloud, her voice breaking on every third word. Email correspondence between my father and Pastor Morrison displayed on the courtroom screen for everyone to see. Bank records showing the money trail from trust to victims to offshore gambling sites and back. Diana Crawford's written statement about the Portland household, the second family my father had maintained with stolen funds. The defendant orchestrated a 15-year criminal enterprise. Lawson concluded, using his professional reputation as a pharmacist, his standing in the church community, and his own family as cover for systematic fraud exploitation and ultimately murder. He poisoned his own mother over 4 months to prevent her from changing her will. He defrauded elderly victims of over $1.2 million, driving at least one to suicide. He endangered 7 children through systematic abuse, and he did all of this while maintaining the appearance of a respected community member. During her presentation, I felt my father's eyes on me. I turned slightly and met his gaze. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pleading. He looked at me with something that might have been respect, an acknowledgement of one strategist to another. He mouthed 2 words, "You won." I didn't look away. I thought of Danny's blue lips on that Thanksgiving porch, Harold Simmons' widow sitting 3 rows behind me, my grandmother's journal entry, "I'm scared," my mother's confession, "I watched him do it." The 7 children who'd been conditioned to think freezing was normal. I mouthed back, "No, they won." I gestured slightly to the victims' families filling the courtroom. My father nodded, almost smiled, and turned back to face the judge. Judge Hamilton reviewed the evidence for 20 minutes occasionally, asking Lawson clarifying questions. Stevens made a perfunctory argument about circumstantial evidence and reasonable doubt, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Finally, Judge Hamilton spoke. "I find sufficient evidence exists for all 60 counts. The defendant is remanded without bail until trial." Given the complexity of this case, trial date is set for 18 months from today. The gavel came down. My father was led out of the courtroom shuffling in his shackles and didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, cold December air hit my face like a slap. Claire squeezed my hand. Martha was already on her phone coordinating next steps with the prosecutor's office. I stood on the steps watching people file out when an elderly woman in a purple coat approached me. "Margaret Bennett." I turned. "Yes. I'm Mary Simmons, Harold's widow." Her voice was soft but steady. "Because of you, I got some of my husband's money back from the frozen accounts. The FBI recovered about $40,000 of what we lost. But more than that, I finally understand why he died. For months I thought he was weak, that he gave up. Now I know he was a victim. Thank you for giving me that truth even though it hurt." Mary Simmons's words stayed with me for days. She'd thanked me for truth that hurt. I thought about that paradox constantly as Christmas approached and my mother's letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain white, my name and address written in her careful handwriting. Inside was a single page on lined notebook paper, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store. No expensive stationery, no pretense. "Margaret, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm asking, may I see my grandson? Not alone, not for long. Just once to apologize to him. He's 9 now. He deserves to hear me say I was wrong and I'm sorry. You can be there. You can supervise. You can say no, but I'm asking, Mom." I showed the letter to Claire over coffee at my kitchen table. She read it twice, then set it down carefully. "She's trying, Meg. I know it doesn't erase anything, but she's trying." Claire pulled out her phone and showed me bank statements. She sold every piece of jewelry Dad bought her over the years. The diamond earrings, the pearls, the Cartier bracelet, all of it. She donated the money to Mary Simmons' $32,000. That's guilt, not change. Maybe, but she's also in therapy 3 times a week. She testified against Pastor Morrison in the federal case. She's working at a grocery store, for God's sake. Patricia Bennett, who wouldn't be caught dead in anything less than designer clothes, is bagging groceries for $9 an hour. Claire looked at me seriously. "She's not who she was, Meg." "Change under consequences isn't the same as voluntary change," I said. "She's doing all of this because the alternative is prison. Does the motivation matter if the behavior is different?" I didn't have an answer for that. After a week of thinking, I agreed to meet her. Neutral territory, Claire present as witness, strict conditions. We chose a park bench near the river, public, enough to feel safe, private enough to talk. My mother arrived early. I watched her from my car for a few minutes before getting out. She wore a simple coat from Target, not the cashmere she used to favor. Her hair was shorter, grayer unstyled. She looked smaller somehow, as if guilt had compressed her physically. I sat down beside her. Claire stood a few feet away, close enough to intervene but far enough to give us space. "Thank you for coming," my mother said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of all performance. "I have conditions," I said. "If you want any access to Danny's life, even supervised, you have to agree to them. Anything." I pulled out the document Martha and I had prepared. "You continue therapy for at least 2 years with a licensed trauma therapist. You never speak negatively about me or my choices to anyone, including Danny. You never attempt to manipulate him emotionally. All contact happens in my presence or Claire's. And if at any point I feel unsafe or see old patterns returning, contact ends permanently with no appeals, no arguments, no second chances." My mother took the paper with shaking hands and read through it slowly. When she finished, she was crying quietly. "These are fair, more than fair. I'll sign anything you want." Martha had prepared a notarized agreement. I handed her a pen. "Before you sign," I said, "I need you to understand something. I'm not ready to forgive you. I may never be ready. This isn't reconciliation. This is probation. You violated your children's trust for decades. You watched your husband poison his own mother and said nothing. You participated in the systematic abuse of 7 children. You don't get trust back with tears and promises. You get it back, if you get it back at all, with years of consistent boundaried behavior." "I understand." She wiped her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness, Margaret. I just want the chance to be better than I was. For Danny to know that his grandmother is sorry. That's all." Martha had told me earlier that what I was creating wasn't weakness. "You're not letting her back in," she'd said. "You're creating a supervised pathway where she can demonstrate changed behavior over time. That's wisdom. You're protecting your son while allowing for the possibility of healing. But you're not naive." My mother signed the document. Claire witnessed it. I folded it and put it in my purse. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," my mother said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "About why your father chose you as the spare wallet. It wasn't random, Margaret. He had a reason. I went cold. "What reason?" She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. Shame, fear, regret. "You weren't his biological daughter. Not entirely." She took a shaky breath. "When you were conceived, Thomas and I were separated. I had a brief relationship with someone else, a doctor I worked with at the hospital. When I got pregnant, I went back to Thomas and told him the baby was his. He agreed to raise you as his own, but he never forgot. You were proof of my betrayal, just like Claire was proof of his. That's why he treated you differently, why he could exploit you without guilt. In his mind, he was extracting payment for a 30-year-old lie." The revelation about my paternity hung in the air between us like something physical. I stared at my mother, trying to process what she'd just told me. Not his biological daughter. 30 years of exploitation justified in his mind by a lie I'd known nothing about. "Who was he?" I asked. "The doctor." "It doesn't matter now. He died 15 years ago. Heart attack." My mother looked down at her hands. "I'm telling you this not to burden you with more secrets, but so you understand the full scope of what your father did. He used my mistake to justify decades of financial abuse. In his mind, every dollar he took from you was payment for raising another man's child." I stood up from the bench. "I need time to process this." "I understand." She didn't try to stop me as I walked away. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as my mother began her court-mandated community service. Her attorney had recommended volunteer work at a senior center as a way to demonstrate remorse and rehabilitation before sentencing. She'd be facing charges as an accessory to my father's crimes, and any evidence of genuine change might reduce her prison time. She started at Riverside Senior Center, a community facility 3 miles from where she used to live. Maria Lopez, the director, called me after the first week. "Your mother asked me to update you on her progress. She wanted you to know she's taking this seriously." Maria's voice was warm but professional. I'll be honest, Margaret. When she first walked in, people recognized her. That woman whose husband defrauded everyone. They were cold to her. Some were openly hostile. But she hasn't complained once. She shows up every Tuesday and Thursday 9 to 3 and does whatever unglamorous work we need. Dishes, mopping, folding laundry. She doesn't talk about herself. She just serves. After 3 months, Maria called again. Your mother started something new. She calls it Stories of Survival Life Lessons from Our Elders. Every Thursday afternoon, she sits with a group of seniors and asks them to share their hardest life experiences. That sounds manipulative, I said immediately. I thought so too at first, Maria admitted. But Margaret, it's not about her. She asks them about the Depression, World War II immigration discrimination loss. Real hardship. And then she asks 2 questions. What did you learn? And what would you tell your younger self? The sessions have become the most popular program we run. 20 people showed up last week. I visited unannounced one Thursday in early December. I stood in the doorway and watched my mother facilitate the session. She sat in a circle with 15 elderly people, a Korean War veteran speaking about losing his best friend in combat. I learned that survival isn't the same as living, the veteran said. I survived the war, but it took me 30 years to start living again. If I could tell my younger self anything, it would be ask for help sooner. My mother listened with complete attention, no performance, no agenda visible. When he finished, she said quietly, "Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of us here understand the difference between surviving and living." After the session ended, the veteran approached my mother. "You can't undo your past," he said, "but you can use it to help others. That's what you're doing here, isn't it?" She nodded, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I'm trying." That evening, she called me. "Margaret, something happened today at the center. There was a homeless man trying to sleep in our doorway. Elderly, maybe 70. I offered to call a shelter, but he said they're all full. He told me December is the worst month everyone remembers to be charitable at Christmas, but they forget the cold kills people before December 25th. What did you do?" I brought him inside, made him coffee, called Maria for permission to let him stay until we closed. And while I was sitting with him, I had an idea. She paused. What if we created a place like the senior center, but specifically for the coldest months? A place where elderly people with nowhere to go can be warm, safe, and fed. We could call it the warming house. I was silent for a long moment, thinking about Danny on that frozen porch. About my grandmother's house, the one my father had fraudulently mortgaged, the one the court was preparing to award to me as restitution. About cycles of cold and warmth and how we choose which one to perpetuate. "Keep that thought," I said finally. The next day, I called Claire. "I think I know what to do with the house. Grandma's house, the one Dad mortgaged, and the court is going to award to me as restitution." "What?" "We're going to turn it into the warming house. A winter shelter, for people who have nowhere else to go when it's cold." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's perfect, Meg. That's absolutely perfect." The court began asset recovery 3 months after the preliminary hearing. My grandmother's house, the one she'd bought in 1965 and lovingly maintained for 50 years, was officially transferred to me as restitution. The paperwork listed its current value at $680,000, minus the $400,000 reverse mortgage my father had fraudulently taken out. Martha met me at her office to discuss options. You could sell it. Clear the debt, walk away with $280,000. Start fresh. I looked at the property deed in my hands, my grandmother's name crossed out, my father's name crossed out, and mine written in. What if I don't want to sell it? Martha leaned back in her chair. Then we negotiate with the bank, restructure the debt, lower payments, extend the term. You'd need capital to make it work, though. Probably $80,000 as a down payment to show good faith. I have that. The trust funds the court recovered, some of it was legitimately mine. You want to keep the house? I thought about my mother's phone call about the homeless man in the doorway, about Danny shivering on that porch exactly 1 year ago. I want to turn it into the warming house, a winter shelter and community center for elderly people who have nowhere else to go. Martha smiled. That's either the best revenge or the best healing I've ever seen. I'm not sure which. Maybe both. We spent October and November renovating. Margaret Claire, our mother, and dozens of volunteers showed up with paintbrushes and hammers and donated furniture. The formal dining room where I'd sat through so many cold, performative family dinners became a communal eating space with mismatched tables and comfortable chairs. The living room where my father had held court became a warm gathering area with donated recliners and shelves of books. The bedrooms where Claire and I had slept as children became overnight shelter spaces with clean linens and privacy curtains. The basement where my father had kept his safe full of secrets became a resource center stocked with donated winter coats, blankets, toiletries, and supplies. My mother worked harder than anyone scrubbing floors and painting walls without complaint. I watched her transform my grandmother's bedroom into a bright, welcoming space and wondered if this was penance or healing or some combination of both. We hung my grandmother's portrait in the entryway. Martha had helped me commission a plaque, Eleanor Grace Bennett, 1932-2015. Her stolen legacy reclaimed her true warmth restored. The warming house opened on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after that terrible Thanksgiving. Local news came to cover the story. Rebecca Kim, who'd broken the original fraud investigation, wrote a follow-up piece, Nurse Turns Family Tragedy into Community Triumph. The first guest to arrive was Mrs. Ruth, my elderly neighbor from my parents' street, the woman who'd called CPS when she saw Danny on the porch. Her husband had died in September, and she'd been struggling alone in their too-big house. "Margaret," she said, tears in her eyes, "I testified for you when no one else would, when everyone thought you were crazy, and now you've created a place where I don't have to be alone in the cold." I hugged her. "You saved my son's life by making that call. This is the least I can do." Danny, now 9 years old and healthy, helped serve hot chocolate to the guests who filtered in throughout the evening. I watched him talking to an elderly man completely at ease and heard him say, "My mom says warmth isn't about temperature, it's about being safe." The man smiled. "Your mom is very wise." I stood in the doorway watching the room fill with people, some homeless, some lonely, some just needing a place to belong on Christmas Eve. The house that had been the site of so much manipulation and cruelty was now offering shelter. My grandmother's stolen legacy had been reclaimed and transformed into something she would have been proud of. This was what justice looked like when it was restorative instead of just punitive. Claire stood beside me, looking around with satisfaction. "You did it, Meg. You took something broken and made it beautiful." We did it, all of us. My mother was in the kitchen coordinating food service, directing volunteers with quiet efficiency. For a moment, watching her work, I could almost see a different version of her life, one where she'd found this purpose decades ago, instead of spending 34 years trapped in fear and complicity. Through the front window, I saw headlights pulling into the driveway. A car door opened and a figure stepped out. Tall, weathered, familiar silhouette. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like my father, but that was impossible. Thomas wasn't supposed to be released for 18 more months. His trial hadn't even started yet. The figure walked toward the door, and as he passed under the porch light, I saw his face clearly. It wasn't my father. It was Michael Bennett, my father's younger brother. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, not since a family gathering where he and my father had argued about money, and Michael had walked out vowing never to return. He stood on the porch looking older than I remembered, his face lined with years of living far from the family drama. When I opened the door, he removed his hat. "Margaret, I hope I'm not intruding. I saw the news coverage about the warming house. I had to come." I invited him inside. Claire appeared at my shoulder, curious and protective. Michael looked around at the transformed house, at the elderly guests, settling into chairs with cups of hot chocolate, at the warmth we'd created from my grandmother's stolen legacy. "I came to apologize," he said. I knew Thomas was a con man. Back in 1998, I lent him $20,000 for what he said was a business investment. He never paid me back. When I pressed him, he got angry, threatened to tell the family lies about me, so I moved to Denver and cut ties. I thought distance was enough. "You're not responsible for your brother's choices," I said. But I knew what he was capable of. I should have warned people. I should have said something when I saw him getting more involved with the church with those elderly members. I thought he wouldn't go that far, but he did. He went further than I could have imagined. Michael pulled out his wallet and extracted a check. "This is for the warming house, $5,000. It's not enough, but it's what I can give." I took the check, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Michael. This will help a lot of people stay warm this winter." He left shortly after, and I watched him drive away thinking about the family members who'd escaped, who'd seen the toxicity and chosen distance. Part of me envied him. 2 days after Christmas, a letter arrived with a return address from the county jail. Thomas Edward Bennett, inmate number 847392. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter was written in my father's precise handwriting, the same hand that had forged my grandmother's signature on fraudulent documents. I debated throwing it away unread, but my nursing instincts won out. Document everything, even this. "Margaret," the letter began, "I won't insult you with apologies. I made calculated choices for 15 years. I told myself I was securing our family's future, that I was being strategic and forward-thinking. The truth is simpler and uglier. I wanted money and status, and I was willing to destroy anyone to get it, including my own mother. You were right to stop me. I will die in prison. That's appropriate." I paused, surprised by the directness. No excuses, no manipulation, just cold acknowledgement of guilt. The letter continued. "But you should know something. Despite everything, you were always my favorite daughter. Not Claire, who I resented for reminding me of my mistakes. Not the children in Portland who I saw as obligations. You, the smart one, the strong one, the one who inherited my strategic mind but chose to use it for good instead of exploitation. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it and I don't expect it. I'm simply telling you, go further than I could. Build something real. You're already doing it with the warming house. Keep going. That's my only request." The letter ended with his signature, nothing more. I brought it to Martha's office the next day. Claire came too. We sat around Martha's conference table while I read it aloud. "He wants you to see him as complex," Martha said when I finished. "As more than just a villain. He's trying to create a narrative where he was sophisticated and strategic, where you inherited something valuable from him." "But complexity doesn't erase harm," I said. "He gets to sit in his cell and philosophize about legacy and strategic thinking. His victims don't get that luxury. Mary Simmons doesn't get to philosophize about why her husband killed himself. Harold Simmons is dead. My grandmother is dead. The 7 children who were traumatized have to do the actual work of healing, not just thinking about it." Claire nodded. "Are you going to respond?" Martha answered before I could. "Any response continues the relationship. It tells him his words still matter to you, that he still has access to your emotional space. Silence is a complete boundary." I thought about that. My father had controlled so much of my life through words, manipulation, gaslighting, financial demands disguised as family obligation. Every conversation had been a trap, a way for him to maintain power. Silence, I realized, was the one thing he couldn't manipulate. "I'm not going to respond," I said. "But I'm not going to burn it either." I filed the letter with all the other evidence, the trust documents, the bank statements, the recordings, the forensic reports. Part of the historical record, part of the documentation of what had happened, but not part of my present life. He wants me to see him as my father, as someone who influenced me, as someone whose approval or recognition matters, I told Claire as we left Martha's office. But he's just a criminal who happened to share DNA with me. That's all he gets to be now. 6 months passed. The warming house served over 300 people during the winter months. Danny thrived in school. My mother continued her volunteer work and therapy. Claire rebuilt her finances. Life moved forward. Then, in early June, ADA Jennifer Lawson called. "Margaret, I need to inform you of a development. Your father wants to change his plea. He's offering to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for life in prison instead of facing the possibility of the death penalty. Before we accept the deal, he's asking if you and your mother support it." I held the phone processing. "He's asking for our permission. Not permission exactly, but the victims' families have a voice in plea negotiations. Your opinion matters. So does your mother's." "What happens if we say no?" "We proceed to trial. It could take 2 years. He might get the death penalty or he might get life anyway. There's no guarantee either way, but it would be public, exhaustive, and painful for everyone involved." I thought about Mary Simmons, about the other victims, about the 7 children who were finally starting to heal. "Can I think about it?" "You have 48 hours. 2 days later, I sat in ADA Jennifer Lawson's conference room with my mother Claire Martha and representatives from 17 victim families. Mary Simmons was there along with Grace Patterson, the woman whose husband's life insurance had been stolen. Ruth Morgan sat beside me, her presence a quiet reminder of how this had all started. Jennifer laid out the options with clinical precision. Thomas Bennett is offering to plead guilty to all 60 counts in exchange for life imprisonment without parole instead of facing a potential death penalty at trial. If we accept, he'll be sentenced within a month. If we proceed to trial, we're looking at 2 to 3 years of court proceedings, extensive testimony from all of you, and no guarantee of outcome. The death penalty is possible but not certain. Life in prison is also possible. We could lose on some counts. "What do the victims want?" I asked. Jennifer looked around the table. "I've spoken with each of you individually, but I want to hear it collectively. This decision affects all of you." Mary Simmons spoke first, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "He's already taken enough years from us. My husband is dead. I spent 6 months not understanding why. Then I spent another year reliving it through investigations and depositions. I don't want to give Thomas Bennett 3 more years of my life sitting in a courtroom. Let him rot in prison now." Others nodded. An elderly man named William Chen, who'd lost his farm to my father's gambling scheme, said, "I'm 78. I don't have 3 years to wait for justice. I need closure while I'm still alive to experience it." Grace Patterson added, "Every day he's out there awaiting trial, even in jail, feels like he's still winning. I want him gone, permanently." I looked at my mother. She'd been silent, hands folded in her lap, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Mom," I said quietly, "what do you think?" She raised her eyes to meet mine. "He should die in prison. That's what he deserves. But I don't need the state to kill him to accomplish that. Life in a cage, knowing he'll never leave, knowing everyone sees him for what he is, that's punishment enough." I turned to Jennifer. "We support the plea." 4 weeks later, we returned to County Superior Court for the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed again, but the atmosphere was different this time. Not anticipatory, but final. This was the end. Thomas was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He looked older, grayer, diminished. Judge Hamilton explained the proceedings. Thomas would enter his guilty plea, and then victims would have the opportunity to deliver impact statements before sentencing. Thomas stood. "I plead guilty to all charges as stated." His voice was flat, emotionless. The public defender beside him looked relieved it was almost over. Judge Hamilton addressed the courtroom. "We will now hear from the victims. Anyone who wishes to speak may do so." For 6 hours, 23 people stood and told their stories. Ruth Morgan described finding her husband's suicide note, reading his words about trusting Thomas because they were church family. Diana Crawford, who'd driven from Portland, described telling her 14-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son that their father was a murderer, watching their faces crumble as their entire childhood was recontextualized. William Chen described losing the farm that had been in his family for 3 generations because he'd believed Thomas's promise of guaranteed returns. One after another they spoke. Some cried, some were angry, some were heartbreakingly composed. Each story built on the last, creating a portrait of systematic destruction that one man had orchestrated over 15 years. I was the last to speak. I walked to the microphone and looked directly at my father. 2 years ago, I came home from work and found my 8-year-old son freezing on a porch. His lips were blue. His body was shutting down. He'd been locked outside for 47 minutes in 28-degree weather as punishment. That was the moment I understood that what I'd always been told was discipline was actually systematic abuse spanning generations. I pulled out my notes but found I didn't need them. The words came from memory, from the place where I'd been processing this trauma for 2 years. My father taught me that love can be a weapon, that family is a tool for control, that money and status matter more than human life. He poisoned his own mother for an inheritance. He destroyed elderly people's life savings for profit. He traumatized 7 children because he could. Today, I'm teaching my son something different. I'm teaching him that love can be a boundary, that family means protection, not exploitation, that some patterns need to be broken, not continued. I looked at Judge Hamilton. Justice is teaching my father that eventually the cage we build for others becomes our own. I sat down. Claire grabbed my hand and held it tight. Judge Hamilton reviewed her notes, then looked at Thomas with an expression of profound disgust. "Mr. Bennett, you spent 15 years building trust in order to destroy it. You weaponized your professional reputation, your position in the church, and your own family. You used community and faith as hunting grounds for victims. This court sees you clearly." She paused. "I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Eleanor Grace Bennett. Additionally, I impose concurrent sentences totaling 180 years for the fraud, exploitation, and abuse charges. You are ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to your victims to be paid from seized assets, including the Portland property and all remaining trust funds. You will die in prison, Mr. Bennett. That is certain." The gavel came down with finality. Thomas was led away by 2 corrections officers. As he reached the door, he turned and looked back at the courtroom. His eyes found mine and held for just a moment. Not pleading, not apologizing, just looking. I didn't look away. I held his gaze until he turned and disappeared through the door. Claire squeezed my hand. "It's over. It's over," I repeated. We walked out of the courtroom into the marble lobby. I was exhausted, emotionally hollowed out, ready to go home and sleep for days. Then I saw them, Danny and Sophie Claire's youngest daughter, sitting on a bench by the window. They were drawing with crayons on paper someone had given them, completely absorbed in their art. Danny was drawing a house with smoke coming from the chimney. Sophie was drawing what looked like a rainbow. They were laughing about something, sharing crayons, their heads bent together in the unself-conscious intimacy of children who don't yet know about family secrets or generational trauma. I watched them and felt something shift in my chest. This was the first generation that would break the pattern. They would grow up knowing warmth, knowing boundaries, knowing that love doesn't hurt. The cycle ended here. With them. With us choosing something different. Claire stood beside me, watching her daughter and my son. "They'll never know the cold," she said softly. "No," I agreed. "They won't." I called my mother and Claire. We met at a coffee shop the next morning, neutral territory, where we could talk without the emotional weight of the warming house or either of our homes. "He's asking if we support the plea deal," I said. "Life in prison instead of the death penalty. No trial." My mother's hands trembled around her coffee cup. She'd been sentenced to 3 years for accessory after the fact to fraud and elder abuse, but the judge had suspended the sentence in favor of 5 years probation and continued community service. She was 2 years into that probation now. "What do you want to do?" Claire asked me. I thought about Mary Simmons, about Harold's suicide note, about the 23 victims who'd lost everything. I want to ask them, the victims, this isn't just our decision. We spent the next day reaching out to victim families through Martha's office. 17 of the 23 responded. 15 said they supported the plea deal. They were tired. They wanted closure. They didn't want to spend 2 more years reliving the trauma in a courtroom. Mary Simmons said it most clearly. He's already taken enough years from us. Let him rot in a cell. I don't need the state to kill him. I just need him gone. 2 days later, I called Ada Lawson. We support the plea deal. All of us. The guilty plea hearing happened 3 weeks later. My father stood before Judge Hamilton and admitted to 60 counts of fraud exploitation, child endangerment, and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 180 years concurrent, and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution from seized assets. I didn't attend. Neither did my mother or Claire. We watched the coverage on the news that evening, and then we went back to work. 2 years passed. The warming house grew beyond anything I'd imagined. What started as a winter shelter for a handful of people became a model program serving over 200 elderly individuals weekly during the cold months from November through March. Local universities sent social work students to study our trauma-informed approach to community care. 3 other cities in Massachusetts contacted us about replicating the program. I'd been invited to speak at a national conference on elder care in Chicago. The house itself had been transformed through donations and grants. Solar panels on the roof reduced our operating costs significantly. A commercial kitchen allowed us to prepare meals not just for our guests, but for homebound seniors throughout the neighborhood. The library had expanded to include large print books, audiobooks, and a computer center where elderly guests could video chat with distant family members. I'd quit my hospital job after the first year to run the warming house full-time. It was terrifying to leave the security of nursing after 27 years. But Martha helped me understand something important. I was still caring for people, just in a different way. Claire handled fundraising and marketing. She'd finally escaped the crushing debt my parents had forced on her by selling her suburban house and downsizing to a modest condo. Her marriage had survived barely after months of couples therapy and complete financial transparency. Now she was training to become a financial counselor specializing in helping abuse victims rebuild their credit and finances. My mother, now 62, had become the full-time volunteer coordinator. She ran the daily operations, supervised other volunteers, and led the Stories of Survival program every Thursday. The program had become so popular that we'd started recording it as a podcast, and we now had over 5,000 regular listeners across the country. She'd been sober for 2 years. I hadn't known about the drinking problem until she mentioned it casually one day. I used to have 2 glasses of wine every night, sometimes 3, sometimes a bottle. I told myself it was sophisticated, that it was how cultured people relaxed. Really, I was just trying to numb myself. She attended AA meetings twice a week and had a sponsor she called when things got difficult. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment 3 miles from the warming house and drove a 12-year-old Honda. She'd earned the right to see Danny once a month, supervised visits where they baked cookies or worked on art projects. She never asked for more time. She never pushed boundaries. She just showed up when scheduled and left when asked. Ruth Morgan had moved into the warming house as a permanent resident after her own house became too much to manage alone. Now she helped with intake, greeting new guests and making them feel welcome. She told me once, "I spent 60 years in that house with my husband. After he died, the walls just echoed with absence. Here I have purpose again." Pastor Morrison was serving a 12-year sentence in a federal facility for her role in the fraud. She sent letters, periodically apologies written on prison stationery. I didn't read them, but I saved them in a file folder. Maybe someday they'd matter to someone. Maybe not. Either way, they were part of the record. My relationship with my mother was cordial but boundaried. We worked together effectively, but we weren't close in the traditional sense. I described it to my therapist, yes, I'd finally started therapy myself as functional coexistence. I've forgiven her enough to work with her, I explained during one session, but not enough to trust her with my vulnerability. Maybe that will change. Maybe it won't. Both are okay. My therapist nodded. That's healthy boundaries, Margaret. Forgiveness doesn't mean unlimited access. I'd started dating someone, a social worker named James, who volunteered at the warming house on weekends. He understood trauma and boundaries in a way that made me feel safe. We took things slowly. Danny liked him, which mattered more than anything. Danny was thriving in 4th grade now, 11 years old, and obsessed with soccer. He occasionally asked questions about Grandpa in prison, which I answered honestly, but age-appropriately. His therapist said he was processing the trauma well, that the nightmares had stopped, that he felt secure. That was all I could ask for. Life had found a new normal. Not the life I'd imagined, but a life built on truth instead of performance, on boundaries instead of obligation, on warmth instead of cold. On Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years after the warming house had opened, I was in the kitchen supervising dinner preparation when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Margaret Bennett? Yes. This is Warden Patricia Cole from MCI Cedar Junction. I'm calling to inform you that inmate Thomas Bennett died this morning of a cardiac arrest. He was 70 years old. You're listed as next of kin. Do you want to claim the body? I stood in the kitchen surrounded by the warmth and laughter of the warming house and felt absolutely nothing. No, I said. I don't want the body. The warden seemed unsurprised by my answer. We'll handle the burial in the prison cemetery. However, his personal effects need to be claimed within 30 days or they'll be disposed of. Would you like those? I hesitated, then said yes. The box arrived a week later via courier. Inside were letters he'd written, but never sent, his pharmacy license from 1978, with a younger version of his face staring out from the laminated card, and wedding photos from 1981 showing my parents on their wedding day, both of them impossibly young and seemingly happy. I didn't open the letters. I didn't need to read his thoughts anymore. But I did take the wedding photos to my mother during one of her shifts at the warming house. These are yours if you want them, I said, setting the envelope on her desk. She opened it slowly, and when she saw the photos, tears started falling immediately. She touched the image of herself at 23, white dress, genuine smile, standing beside the man who would spend the next 40 years destroying her piece by piece. I was so young, she whispered. I didn't know anything. None of us know anything at 23. She looked up at me. Thank you for bringing these. I don't know if I'll keep them, but thank you for giving me the choice. At the bottom of the box, I found one item I wanted to keep. A photograph of my grandmother holding a baby me based on the date written on the back, in faded ink, June 1970. My grandmother looked radiant, her smile unguarded in a way I rarely saw in later photos. I turned the photo over and read her handwriting. This one will be strong enough. I had the photo professionally framed and hung it in my office at the warming house. Danny saw it a few days later and asked, "Is that you with Great-Grandma?" "It is." "You were really small." He peered closer at the inscription. "What does she mean you'll be strong enough?" I thought about how to answer that. Great-Grandma hoped I'd be brave enough to break patterns that hurt people. Hope isn't a guarantee, it's a responsibility. I had to choose to make her hope real. He considered this seriously, the way 11-year-olds do when they're processing something important. "Did you?" "I'm trying every day." In late January, we held the second annual Return to Warmth ceremony at the warming house. We'd scheduled it for the coldest night predicted all winter, when the temperature dropped to 15 degrees and the wind made it feel even colder. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The entire community was invited. Over 300 people showed up, filling every room of the house and spilling out onto the heated enclosed porch we'd built with grant money. Survivors of my father's fraud came, many of them having received partial restitution from the seized assets. Mary Simmons was there with her daughter. Ruth Morgan, now a permanent resident, greeted guests at the door with warmth that felt earned rather than performed. Sandra Mitchell from CPS gave a short speech about how the case had changed protocols across the state. We now have mandatory training on identifying patterns of systematic abuse across multiple children in extended families. We've revised our investigation procedures to prioritize documentation over reputation. Margaret Bennett's case taught us that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a respected pharmacist and a church deacon. A representative from the state attorney general's office announced new legislation that had passed unanimously the previous month. Eleanor's law requires annual independent audits of all family trusts valued over $500,000. It mandates criminal background checks for trustees and creates a hotline for reporting suspected elder financial abuse. This law will protect thousands of vulnerable seniors across Massachusetts. And it exists because one nurse refused to stay silent when her family tried to destroy her for telling the truth. The applause was thunderous. I felt Claire squeeze my hand on one side and James squeeze the other. Then Danny stood up to read a poem he'd written for school. His teacher had submitted it to a youth writing contest, and it had won first place in his age category. He walked to the front of the room, clutching his paper, suddenly shy in front of so many people. "It's called My Mom Stopped the Cold," he said, his voice small but steady. "My mom is a nurse who saves people's lives. But the biggest save she ever made was me. When I was freezing and the door was locked, she opened it and said no more. She didn't just warm my body. She warmed the whole world by making sure no more kids would freeze. Now we have a house where everyone is warm. My mom says cold builds nothing but fear. But warmth builds family, the real kind where people are safe. My great-grandma would be proud. I'm proud too." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. I watched my son, this child who'd nearly died on a frozen porch, who'd been used as a pawn in my parents' games, who'd survived and thrived despite everything, and felt something settle in my chest. Pride, yes, but also peace. After the ceremony ended, after most of the guests had left, and only the volunteers remained cleaning up, I stood at the front window of the warming house, the same window I'd looked through 2 years ago and seen my son shivering on the porch. Now I saw people laughing inside, eating leftover cake, helping wash dishes safe and warm, and choosing to be here. My mother approached and stood beside me, looking out at the snow that had started falling in thick, heavy flakes. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I answered honestly. That warmth isn't inherited or guaranteed. It's not genetic. It's not something that passes through blood. It's a daily choice to not pass along the cold we received. Some families pass down recipes or money or china patterns. We pass down trauma, but it stops here. I looked at Danny across the room, helping James stack chairs. My son will know warmth, not because it's in our blood, but because we built it brick by brick, boundary by boundary, day by day. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I say something? You became the mother I should have been." I turned to look at her. "No. I became the mother I had to become. There's a difference." She nodded slowly, accepting the distinction. "Yes, there is." We stood together in silence, watching the snow fall outside. Inside the warming house, the heater hummed softly. Someone laughed in the kitchen. A kettle whistled for tea. Ruth was telling a story about her husband, a good memory this time, and people were listening. My grandmother's photo hung on the wall behind me. This one will be strong enough. Not born strong. Not guaranteed strong. But strong enough because I chose to be, because I built that strength through every boundary I set, every truth I told, every time I chose protection over comfort. The snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless, covering everything outside in white. But inside, in the house that had once been a place of cold manipulation and cruelty, people were warm, not because of inheritance or luck or anything beyond our control, but because we chose warmth, every single day we chose it. And that, I realized, was the only revenge that mattered. Not destruction, but creation. Not tearing down, but building up. Not cold for cold, but warmth in the face of it. The cycle ended here. With us. With this choice. And somewhere in the quiet, without drama or fanfare, the snow continued to fall. But inside, everyone was warm. Thank you for staying with me through Margaret's entire journey. From that frozen Thanksgiving night to the warmth of the warming house, this story reminds us that breaking generational cycles isn't easy, but it's possible. Margaret chose truth over comfort, boundaries over obligation, and warmth over the cold that had defined her family for decades. She proved that revenge doesn't have to be destruction. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ruins. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful true stories. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? How did you find the courage to break a harmful pattern? Your story might inspire someone else who's struggling right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that protection is more important than keeping the peace, and that warmth, real warmth, is always a choice we make, not something we inherit. Thank you for listening, and remember, history only repeats if we allow it.